This is a journey of empowerment. We will explore together the hidden patterns which manifest everything in physical existence. By learning how to work with subtle energy patterns known to ancient traditions, you can initiate an alchemical transformation within yourself. This process can empower your individual evolution of consciousness and thereby assist the raising of consciousness on our planet. Sacred geometry meaning the divine blueprints of consciousness and energy.
So, first, knowledge of esoteric science and our place within the universe, and laid down in stone the data so that it could withstand catastrophic events. Court Lindahl is with us today to speak about the connection between the octagonal form, Temple Mount, Constantine, and even Thomas Jefferson. So, first and foremost, I think it's important for us to set up what is the axis mundi and what by way of thought and philosophy has been based on it throughout the ages.
Okay, well, primarily at first from a practical perspective, the axis mundi was used and still is to legally describe property for rulers or royal interests. And over the centuries, it gained a lot of spiritual overtones related to astrology, primarily because the arts of astrology and astronomy have a lot of overlap in calculating arcs on the globe and directions on the globe from a central point. So that's one way that the general public could relate to what it is, or the place where star logs are collected.
Have any orientation in terms of what we would call magnetic, such as more an orientation toward the true north, for example?
Right. Well, at first, there's a difference between the magnetic pole and the pole star. Mm-hmm. They're in different positions. So at first it was more common to use the pole star, or in some cases you even see the Catholic Church, for instance, in a lot of their churches aligned it with the equinox, which is a little bit off of 90 degrees true mm-hmm. north, but it's very close, and they might not have even known the difference. I can measure it with Google Earth now, so mm-hmm. I can tell. But yeah, generally, at first, they use the pole star. The Great Pyramid is oriented towards the pole star. The Tower of the Winds in Athens, many of the cathedrals are oriented that way. And that's just easier to do. You can just do a line of sight. So when the compass was developed later, they learned the difference between the declination between the pole star and the magnetic pole to adjust for navigation and things like that. So no, at first, the compass wasn't as important. They relied on looking at the stars and comparing the angles and positions of celestial bodies to fix their position. So this is before the compass. And that helped them later, obviously, to navigate between one point to the other.
So let's throw another big one on the table, because somehow it'll intersect down the road, and that is the search for the Holy Grail. How does the axis mundi and the search for the Holy Grail intersect?
Well, that's a good question. And what I've seen over time is that this technique was used to hide or even suggest that something was hidden. And you only see a certain class of people. As I said, it was used to legally describe property at first, so royal interests, and you can kind of see a family tradition evolving. And then over time, different branches of royal groups seem to be privy to this or have mm-hmm. the skills to do it at a time when the average person couldn't. And then after more time went by, you see secret societies and other groups like that doing it as well. So the search for the Holy Grail is one of these kind of quest legends that we see, I believe, developing from the man in the mountain mythology that we see Charlemagne being involved in. I believe he created a mystery.
Explain the man in the mountain mystery or mythology.
Right. Well, this is one of the tenets even that Rosicrucians value. Christian Rosenkreuz was interred in the mountain with information that people are supposed to quest for. So just even a little bit before that, Charlemagne created a same kind of mystery with his remains. And you'll see that yes. time after time. There's kind of a funerary overlay to the origins of the modern form of this that we're seeing. in that it always involves the search for a certain set relic. And that echoes back to Egypt too, because when Horus was dismembered, his body parts were in different temples and people would make pilgrimages to each place. So the Holy Grail's like that too. And this is one of the things you can see, that maybe this was developed as a way to legally describe property, as I say, but people were smart enough, they realized they could use it to hide things because the public at large wasn't aware of the techniques that they needed to know to find it.
At the same time, as I mentioned in the open, it also left information hiding in plain sight for anyone with eyes to see throughout history, long periods of history.
And that takes some development and study. It's taken me 8 years to get to the point I'm at. And you can see, I think, some of these family groups actually being prompted or being given some of the basic information that they would need to go to one of these places.
As part of the family lineage
yes,
of knowledge.
And figure out what it meant. And that ties also to the legal description of property, because as you see the political winds of change go on and new places being settled by Europeans, you can see the same families.
Well, now we'll go down that rabbit hole a little further. So the Egyptians had knowledge, as you say in your book, of magnetite and lodestone as well, and their history. So they use these to orient to true north, but there are other implications of that knowledge. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, they could have made a compass using magnetite, obviously, and really this would represent just a huge economic advantage, because
long before the compass was ever thought to have been invented, for example.
There's a lot of speculation that it was around way before. There's even noted cults of the pole star that in Rome that they think had compasses before. About 1000 AD is the generally accepted time frame.
So those are useful on the ground.
Right. And as I was describing before, these temples, you have to take star logs, and you have to take enough readings to be able to compare them to each other. So this is how land was claimed even by Spain. Like the Dome of the Rock points to the Solomon Islands, for instance, on the Temple Mount.
From the Temple Mount, that's the name Solomon Islands.
So what the magnetic compass would allow you to do is take the most direct route from Alexandria to Rome, knowing the angle using the compass, because you know the angle of the difference between the pole star and the magnetic pole. So if you know this and your competition doesn't, you have a huge business advantage even. Expediency, you can be the FedEx of the day and get it there overnight or a lot quicker than your competition. This also allows you to just take the Mediterranean basin for example. You could map the entire thing, know where all the shoals are, shipwrecks or islands are, and hidden places that other people would have no idea, because they would just follow the currents or the prevailing winds, where you have the ability to go any direction, anywhere you want.
So you date this back thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah, I think it could, obviously the Egyptians had it.
Right.
Any kind of civilization that possibly we don't know about, that Graham Hancock talks about and other researchers, they could have very easily had this. I think there's always an element of highly intelligent people that figure things out. It's just a matter of them getting it into the public consciousness or beyond the group of elite that would want to control whatever technology or ideas they come up with. And I really think during this era of navigation, you could compare it to computers or any other technological advancement. If you can control that for a significant amount of time before
it
becomes well known, then you're just that much farther ahead of the curve.
And the expansion of empires.
And then that advantage just becomes exponential now, because then you're going to dominate all the other technology and ideas that are happening. All the intelligent people, they always seem to promote, recruit, and look for all the people that they know are going to be able to advance what their goals are.
Absolutely.
Well, this speaks to the generational plans, I believe.
Yes.
That families are involved, and ever since ancient times, they've had goals that have lasted the whole time, and part of these mystery school structures and goings on are to help to teach the newer family members, or if it ever becomes unknown again, they'll have the capacity there to go and figure out again what was lost before. And that's one of the concepts, like from the Pillars of Boaz and Yakin and Masonry, where in the Book of Enoch, where they inscribed it with all the tenets of science and mathematics so it would be preserved through a catastrophe.
You know, we were talking off camera, and a lot of what we do, and other outlets as well, falls under the category of conspiracy theory, which tends to paint various subjects with the same color, the same kind of motives, for example. And I was saying to you off camera that I can't do that anymore because it's far more varied than that, textured than that. And when we look at these families passing down this knowledge and always looking for the most intelligent to groom, to bring into the fold and such, what is your view on all of that after doing all this research in terms of toward what end? And we're going to get into what their allegiances, what their maybe overarching spiritual practices and such have been later.
I think it could relate to that, their spiritual practices, but you definitely see them using it to dominate commerce, business, mining, railroads, you name it. They control the monopoly board and they own all the utilities. So,
pretty much.
Yeah, that seems to be in Europe the pattern ever since even Egypt. That has been one of the goals of what they're doing to maintain just control over the economy, and that as a byproduct now you have control over everything else, the social mores, philosophy, and then it seems like they even tailor that to fit their goals. We see how the media is manipulated.
Pretty much everything we can see in
Strange
plain
things
sight
hidden in movies
is
and
manipulated.
music. Yes,
Yeah.
it's all there. These messages are there for us, and if you learn the language of the birds, you can listen to a lot of different music or watch a movie and interpret it in a totally different way that you know was meant to be.
So, okay, Constantine. Let's get to Constantine. The
Okay.
Tower of the Winds in Athens. What is the cultural root of what Constantine did with his octagons as well? And let's just focus on him for a little bit. The key
Okay.
player that he was in the day.
Sure.
How he contributed to this story.
Certainly. Well, we all know that he is credited with the creation of the modern form of Christianity in the Council of Nicaea, but if you examine...
But he wasn't Christian.
Right. If you examine the structures, yeah, that's argued, a lot of people say
Yeah.
that, but I think what I'm trying to do is give you some evidence here that shows you're right.
Right.
That it seems like he was either a Mithras follower, or even if he had some Christian values, they were more oriented toward the Gnostic Gospels
Right.
and the Coptic kind of view of things. And I think these octagonal structures that he built were part of that. And I really do believe if you examine the details of how the Dome of the Rock was built, for instance, and this was built later, but I found some 18th century sources that say Constantine the Great built the Dome of the Rock, or he built an octagonal structure there first that may have been demolished. And then even when you look into the dynamics of how the official story tells it, Justinian II, the Byzantine ruler, sent artists and engineers to assist the Caliph of Jerusalem in the building of the Dome of the Rock.
Right.
So to me, this is suggestive of he was manipulating, because the Caliph actually paid tribute to Justinian at that time to not invade. So he's sending the people to design the building and build it. I think they just rebuilt Constantine's octagon, and it may even be possible that it was never even demolished, that they just put tile work and made it look, and a dome on top of it. It used to be open in the center or have a canted roof like this, like the powder magazine in Colonial Williamsburg. But it's interesting in that the octagon of the Dome of the Rock points to the obelisk at the center of St. Peter's Square. And we also...
And Constantine, go ahead, yes.
Yeah, and we'll get to that.
Yes.
And this was before the windrose markers were there, but today the obelisk is there, and it's surrounded with markers that actually have compass directions inscribed on them. And each of those places, Fatima, Portugal, one of them to the east points right to Constantine's home of the Octagon of the Daphne in Constantinople, and it points back to the Dome of the Rock. So both of these structures infer the same direction thousands of miles apart that point each other, and they're involved in the same theme, the development of Christianity, the architecture of Constantine, and the story of Justinian I, which is amazing in and of itself. He was the only Roman ruler to ever have been deposed and regain his throne. When he was deposed, they slit his tongue. So he would wear a mask to cover the deformity when he came back and reconquered and took the throne back. So later, obviously, he went through all of these things, I believe, building the Dome of the Rock or rebuilding it because he knew Constantine was there. This all led me to believe that Constantine could have even been buried beneath
That's
the Dome of the Rock.
what I was going to ask you, yes.
And then we see possibly even the Knights Templar. There's so many legends of them finding something beneath the Dome of the Rock.
Yes.
We know the temple treasure was gone. It was displayed in Rome at the Peace Temple that I mentioned before, and the Lateran Palace in Rome, which Constantine also rebuilt. So I think that's off the table. I think that's somewhere else. The Visigoths ended up with it, or the Romans hid it somewhere. So I think the Knights Templar found the remains of Constantine the Great and associated library of information that was left, because that's another theme you see reemerging during the time of Charlemagne, when Otto III, Holy Roman Emperor, opened Charlemagne's crypt and found him wearing a mask. No, he left him wearing a mask when he closed it, just like Justinian's on his face, on Charlemagne's corpse. In the crypt were the Coronation Gospels, which is an illuminated manuscript.
I was going to ask you about those. No, before we go to the Coronation Gospels, because I don't know anything about them.
Okay.
Is there a significance that that Constantine had declared Constantinople the new Rome?
Yes, yeah, that was the original name of Nova Roma, and it just gained the name Constantinople before it. And I think his beliefs are part of why he did this. We were discussing how
The
he
Mithras beliefs.
how he had more Eastern
Yes.
Christian possibly beliefs, or Mithraic beliefs with pagan beliefs, obviously, as well. And that's why he wanted to move, not in the least of which he was from there.
Right.
I mean, his birthplace is given either in Macedonia, which is right next, just to the west of Constantinople, or Nicodemia, which is just to the east in Turkey. So he was even from that. That's probably the reason I would go toward. But there's no doubt that he realized that the royal district that he established was due east of the obelisk at St. Peter's Square.
Okay, let's go back a little further. You also stated Byzantine royalty rebuilt the Temple Mount as a copy of an array of monuments at Baalbek, Lebanon.
Yes.
Okay,
I think so.
let's get to that area.
Okay. Well, if you look at the Temple Mount, you'll see the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which that's called
Yes,
today.
right.
That was originally built as the Church of St. Mary Justinian
Yeah, and this is going to take us into that.
by Justinian I.
Yeah.
And he also copied Constantine by building Basilica San Vital, which is also an octagon. So you see later it feeds into my theory about how Constantine, if Justinian had built the church there, that means the Dome of the Rock was already there. Okay, history does not tell you that's true. They say the Muslims built it in the 7th century. The Church of St. Mary Justinian was built in the 5th century, or 6th century. I'm getting it mixed up. Dome of the Rock was 7th century. The church was built in the 6th century. So he was just complementing what Constantine had already done. Now, if you compare the plan view of the Temple of Jupiter in Baalbek with the hexagonal structure, it's the same layout, except now it's the church in an octagon. And this goes back to what I was supposing before about the hexagon representing the more pagan value. I believe Baalbek was the pagan Roman axis. It points to the Great Pyramid. It points to, in Libya, to Tunisia, or Tunis, where the war harbor of Carthage was, which is a regularly built geometric structure that has an octagon in the middle of it. Later we see Thomas Jefferson pointing one of his
we're
structures
going to go there.
He showed respect later to many of the things I'm telling you about now.
Yes.
So this tradition was just there, and Justinian I was aware of it. Justinian II And Justinian II was the last Byzantine ruler to actually live in the octagonal room in the Daphne Palace that Constantine had built. So really, he's the last Byzantine true Roman ruler, in my opinion. After him, you see the mantle of power going to Charlemagne. And
Who continues the tradition.
Right, and I think the Merovingians had a lot to do with that, and Theodora, Justinian I's wife.
Okay, we're going to go there in just a sec.
Okay.
One of the things you said is you think that the Temple Mount in Jerusalem may hold some of the most controversial secrets of all times. Is this what we were just referring to?
Yes, I believe
Okay.
there's Constantine's remains, and lots of information were recovered by the Knights Templar, and this is what they had that threatened the church. Because here the church is always telling us Constantine created our church. And they don't even like the Eastern Orthodox Church that's more aligned with Constantine.
Right.
So that's a secret. If he was a Gnostic or a pagan or Mithraic worshiper, then they don't want you to know that because he would have that effect on other people.
Yes.
And I do think you see this value through time, even in more modern times. I think there's a class of people that are privy to all of this, and they do know these things.
Yes. Okay, so you had just mentioned the church that preceded the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Church of St. Mary, Justinian, right? Let's start going into the story of Mary, or the Magdala story, Theodora, the story of the women weavers and how that weaves in with the Merovingian line.
Right. And this is interesting because we go back to Basilica San Vitale in Ravenna, Italy. There's also the Santa Apollinare Nuevo Basilica there that the Al-Aqsa Mosque is a copy of. If you look at the interior, it's almost identical. I mean, it's not as nice, but the layout and the placement of the beams and columns and everything is in that style. It's a Byzantine style building. So, but if we go to Basilica San Vitale, it has pointing qualities too. It points to Avebury also, just like the Tower of the Winds. And that's one point I'd like to make. You see, both these men, Justinian I and Constantine, even though separated by over 300 years, were both Greek culture in origin. They spoke Greek, wrote in Greek. The Byzantines were a lot more Eastern oriented than the Latin Church, obviously. But within Basilica San Vitale are the most amazing mosaics in the world. There's Christ Pantocrator, shown with short hair, no beard, wearing Byzantine royal robes. So this is them, that's a notion of what I'm getting to with Charlemagne, thinking or believing that he may have been related. But even more interesting is the mosaic of Theodora, because it shows her
Tell us something about her,
Okay,
the
yes.
day, that
Right.
period of history,
Sure.
and so forth.
This is in the 6th century when Basilica San Vitale was built. I believe it was in 535 AD.
Its location?
It's in Ravenna, Italy, which is northeast Italy, kind of south of Venice. And this was really the first seat of the Christian faith even before the Vatican was. This was made that. So him and Theodorica, there's a real interesting oddity there because they were fighting the Visigoths at that time. The Romans and Byzantines were. And Theodoric ruled Ravenna, but he had an agreement with Justinian that he actually owned it. And that's called an excurate. It's a type of political division. So as soon as the Basilica San Vitale was built, Theodoric died and Justinian took over Ravenna. And that's when the mosaics were added. Justinian I's wife was Theodora. And she has a very interesting life. She was trained in Coptic Christianity in Alexandria, Egypt. And this is the place where we see the Gospels of Mary and the Nag Hammadi texts and all of these older Gnostic concepts coming from Ptolemaic Egypt. The Greeks had controlled Egypt since Alexander the Great in the 3rd century BC. So there's, a huge exchange of ideas, I believe, going on between Greece and Egypt, including the Tower of the Winds. I found an earlier one there that I'm just now starting to study.
Oh, interesting.
That's associated with Cleopatra even, at Abu Simbel, west of Alexandria.
Yes.
I don't know more about that, but I think that's even before the Tower of the Winds in a Greek way. So Theodora studied all of this. It's noted. Her faith was different. She believed in the kind of Coptic Eastern Christianity that included Christ being a man and not being divine like the Latin Church. And this was accepted and acknowledged even though Justinian didn't believe that. He was still Eastern Orthodox, but they believe Christ is divine just like the Western
Did
Church.
she have her own followers then?
Yes.
Or were they principally female?
Yes, and that's what's interesting. When you look on the mosaic, her sister and her niece, Sophia, are wearing Coptic tunic patches. And this is easily...
Very open-minded of Justinian the First
to
allow his wife to carry on in her own tradition and belief.
By many accounts, though, she was the stronger and real ruler. That's true. If you read that, during the Nika riots, for instance, in Constantinople, Justinian wanted to leave, and she said, "No, I'm staying, and they can kill me wearing royal purple." So she almost had more chutzpah than the ruler.
So now how does this come into the story of the weavers?
Well, Theodora was trained as a weaver.
Explain what a weaver means.
Her story is so similar to Mary Magdalene. You know, she was cast as a prostitute dancing girl, and supposedly she learned the weaving craft as part of her training in Alexandria. And she
most prostitutes do, right?
Right, sitting around knitting and doing needlepoint and everything.
That still galls me.
Right.
Go ahead.
I mean, she may have well been cast as a prostitute dancing girl, and supposedly she learned the weaving craft as part of her training in Alexandria. And she
most prostitutes do, right?
Right, sitting around knitting and doing needlepoint and everything.
That still galls me.
Right.
Go ahead.
I mean, she may have well been an entertainer or something like that.
Or may not have.
Who knows? But stretched into that.
Prostitution.
Just like Mary Magdalene.
Always,
So, cut back to the 6th century, and she's now the empress, and her sister and niece are part of her, court, let's say. We see Theodora creating a group of nuns that are all taught to weave, and Sophia is trained in this as well, and they're wearing the Coptic tunic patches, one of which is the Chi-Rho and another one's an octagon. And you can plainly see them in the mosaics, and if you go look up what they are, it's not related to the normal Christian religion that's there. We can easily imagine this group of nuns or sect of nuns kind of creating the culture of Mary Magdalene that we see later in Europe, and as transmitted by the Merovingians possibly, or the Three Marys, story, those kind of stories. The Theban Legion of Zion, France, that came from Thebes, Egypt, and were martyred there very early on. We see that all of these values coming later to Charlemagne. And even the Cathars were known as weavers. And a lot of the tenets of their faith, and even the Aryan faith, that not Aryan like Nazi Germany, the more Gnostic-oriented Christianity was likely a result of what she created.
The women's tradition.
Yes, and I still believe this likely exists now, the weavers. I think they're still with us, and they're promoting kind of maybe some of the things we see in the Da Vinci Code, and things that are leading everybody to maybe consider that as true more than in the past.
And it's interesting as we were just kind of joking about the notion that all of the women that are represented as powerful throughout history were viewed as prostitutes. What just occurred to me is if they were women of strength and power, as in ancient times and pagan times, they could choose their partner. Now, to be viewed later by the church, then, they would call them a prostitute because they might have had an important liaison outside of wedlock.
Sure.
So I can see where that term has been misapplied throughout history to these powerful women.
Certainly, and just to smear the enemy, the antithesis of what you're saying, if you want that,
Right.
to sling mud at the most basic level you can by doing that.
It's fascinating. It's a ride. It's a wild ride.
Well, I hope everyone's enjoying having a good ride.
Yeah, so stay tuned for part 2 when we speak of the mysterious treasure of Oak Island, Nova Scotia, and how this remote place ties the great bloodlines of Europe.
The technology that we faced was far superior than anything that we had, and you could put that anywhere. We have nothing that can stop in midair and go the other direction, nor do we have anything that can, like in our situation, come down from space, hang out for 3 hours, and go back up.
We would see these objects being at 0.0 Mach, that's 0 airspeed, over certain pieces of the ground. So what that means, just like a river, if you throw a bobber in, it's going to float downstream. These objects were staying completely stationary in Category 4 hurricane winds.
Like George Knapp breaking Area 51, he's the reason I knew about that.
Biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
We are in a new age. I never thought I would see this, ever, in my life.
Dave Grush will be remembered as, and still be remembered and still be honoured as a great American, a patriot, who played a huge role in bringing to light an absolute criminal scandal.
This is a genie that cannot be put back in the bottle.
Secrets, cover-ups, and strange phenomena.
UFOs and ideas that challenge reality itself. All these mysteries, all this time. Are we ever going to get to the bottom of these?
My name is George Knapp. I dig into news stories that others can't or won't.
I'm Jeremy Corbell, and for some reason, people tell me things they probably shouldn't. And this is Weaponized.
This is Weaponized. We're doing things a little bit differently this week. Jeremy and I are still here in Washington, D.C., where some major things unfolded this week that we will be discussing today. I am here in, he said it was a Motel 6, which was the best room that Jeremy could book for me. He's at the Ritz-Carlton, I believe, or maybe it's the Waldorf Astoria, I don't know.
Let's just say it's not too bad here. Probably the nicest hotel we have ever or will ever stay in.
This is the best he could do for me. We're going to do a roundtable today, a discussion with a couple of our closest friends. As anyone who follows the UFO world knows that it is a planet that is populated by locusts and reptiles and vampires. But there are also some really solid journalists, investigators, reporters, podcasters, a very small group that we consider to be good friends, honorable people, and they are joining us today. Ross Coulthart is one of the premier investigators and reporters in the world. He's won national awards in Australia and other places, and he's broken a really big story this year that we're going to talk about. Bryce Zabel has been a friend of mine for a long time. He's a writer, producer, ex-reporter, and podcaster. These are two guys that we feel kinship with because they have their own podcast called Need to Know. We watch it all the time. We hope other people watch it as well. Ross, Bryce, thanks for joining us on Weaponized.
Lovely to be here, guys. It's a real pleasure.
Guys, it is good to be here. Ross and I were talking about it, and Jeremy as well. It's kind of like the DC versus Marvel crossover. You get Superman and Thor on the same screen at the same time. It's very nice.
This was Bryce's idea that we should get together, and it was a great idea because we do feel a kinship with you guys. The stuff that you do is the same kind of things that we try to do, and it's just top notch. And I hope that Weaponized viewers will go ahead and check out Need to Know as well, and we'll give them plenty of reasons to do that in the course of this conversation. Jeremy, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I just want to celebrate, guys. I mean, we had a historic moment. So first of all, Bryce, Ross, George, join me in a cheers, even if you don't have one.
Oh, yeah.
Don't worry, it's early here in DC. There we go. Here's the deal, guys. I'm so excited. You know, I have just full transparency. I've been a fan of this UFO topic since I heard George on the radio in 1989 talking about something that was not cool to talk about. And it was surreal for me to be part of this, to try to help nurture what we saw historically yesterday, and then to look at the expression on George's face when what he had been talking about 30 whatever years ago was coming to fruition.
With G-Man in DC,
Hey, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate it.
hey, who's open?
What's up, George?
Secret meetings. Tons of secret meetings and shit.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
On Capitol Hill today, a bipartisan call phenomenon. 1 peace, 3 retired military veterans.
And Jeremy Corbell is a documentary filmmaker.
Something that's been going on a long time. And I'll tell you, I was there all day, days before, helped set this up. They wouldn't allow for a secure facility for him to speak just today. So you have to understand, it's only shocking if you haven't been paying attention. Today was a historic day, Gotti, and I think you understand why. If you have
Office building, you might have heard of it.
Pentagon?
That's where
What's over there, George?
there's a 5-sided building. The world's largest office building. You might have heard of it.
Pentagon?
That's where we grifters, we work there. They pay us.
Cool.
At the same time, to have you guys on here, and people do have a need to know, not just a right to know. And you have aptly named your podcast Need to Know. And I'm a fan of it. I've been watching it, and we are all friends. So it is so cool to have a roundtable where we're not interviewing you, you're not interviewing us. We're just going to talk about this in real time so others can join us in this and say, what are we seeing? What do we know? What else do we have a need to know? So with that said, guys, thanks so much for letting me participate. Let's do this.
You know, Jeremy, the first thing I would say is I was watching you guys sit in the front row of that. And I was kind of swelling with a little pride too, to see the two of you able to, well, first of all, as any PR person would know, you were in every shot. It was fantastic. But the one thing I would say to you, George, is you looked like the guy on the airplane who got the middle seat between two reasonably large people. Those were tiny seats. Tell me I'm wrong.
No, you're absolutely right. Bryce, I appreciate you're the only person on all of social media to really care about what I was going through. As I told you, responding to your tweet, I think if I had lasted 10 more minutes in those seats, that rigor mortis would have set in on both of my butt cheeks, because I was crowded in there, and I'm a little claustrophobic to begin with. But it was no accident we got those seats. Jeremy can tell us how we went about getting those.
So the thing is that the reality of this, just to be fully transparent, this was something that I was helping to organize from the initial thought of this, having this hearing. It was a fight to make sure that, can you imagine? It was a fight to make sure people were put under oath. That's a fight I had to personally engage in. All the witnesses.
I'm so pleased you did that, Jeremy. It was so important. I actually had a little tear in my eye when I saw Dave stand and lift his hand. It was so special.
Yeah. So to be clear, all the witnesses wanted to be put under oath, not just symbolically, but they wanted it on record under oath. But it was so strange, the internal combativeness, I'm not going to name names, but within these committees, subcommittees, it was amazing. So that was a huge win, to get everybody under oath. And I don't think it's any secret that, I created an opportunity to be able to get the right people there. Now, with that said, the seating thing was, my fight was to make sure that Dave Grush's lawyer, the former ICIG, who I know you guys know, but for our audience, right, Chuck McCullough, was sitting behind his client. That should seem to everybody in the world as the appropriate position. So that was set up before. I was like, make sure that Chuck is behind Dave because he's his representation. I know they fought that as well, but in reality, once you get in a room, it's like very strange what people try to do to diminish, disqualify, try to divert attention, whatever. I'm really glad that Chuck was behind his client, David Grush. Okay, but why that's important, just because I need to make sure our audience who, this is inner workings shit.
Sure.
There has been so much attempts to alter the visual and understanding perception of what's actually going on to the point where they're not even giving skips out to people that have stuff to say, which we'll talk about later. So just the idea of what people are seeing, because you know how debunkers are. They take one shot of an empty room because what happens is like AOC has to get up and leave the room for an important call for like a few minutes and come back. So there are times when it looks empty up there, but man, people were coming in and out. And I knew what debunkers would do. There was an overflow room with like 150 people packed. People came from all around the world to be there, not just the country. I was able to meet people, George and I, as we walked. So the perception of that, I wanted to make sure people saw what was going on. And the other reason why there was nobody next to me is because I think people are scared of me. That's why I didn't put George on. Right. I got the open seat. He got the closed seat. I'm sorry, George. That's my fault. Now that we got seating arrangements understood, let's talk about what's really important.
Well, actually, Jeremy, one quick thought on that. I'm not a debunker, but I was watching it closely, and there was never any sense on my part that it wasn't a jammed, packed house. What was interesting for me, though, as I continued to watch it, by the time I got to the end, it looked like a typical congressional committee hearing where there's fewer and fewer people, and by the end of it, a lot of seats among the congressmen were gone. I mean, were empty, and I thought, for crying out loud, if you're talking about what may be the biggest story ever, and information that we're actually not alone in the universe, and confirming it in the halls of Congress, it did seem strange to me that so many congressmen and women had other things to do in a short meeting.
Have you ever been to a congressional hearing?
Oh yeah, I mean,
okay. So so what happens is though, like AOC, I watched, and I know some folks that were dealing with it. She'd have to get up and go do something. They didn't know how huge this was going to be until that moment. So really, you see people come in and out and jump in. They were fighting to be there.
It was interesting that they added a couple of people who were not on the committee by special request. Matt Gaetz is not on that committee. AOC, I don't think, is on it, but they added, with permission of the body, a couple of people who were not on the committee who just wanted to be there for the proceedings. And what Tim Burchett had told us was they had more media requests for this hearing than anything else that's happened this year. Pretty interesting. Ross, I would like to get a sense of you watching this in Australia, the sense of pride you must have had to see Dave Grush there in the middle, spilling the beans, the stuff that he had told you and Bryce before. How did you feel?
It was actually quite emotional. I mean, you guys, I mean, George, you understand, and Jeremy, I'm sure you do as well, as does Bryce, the relationship that you build with sources as you tell a story, and the responsibility, the awful responsibility you feel as a journalist in shepherding somebody to the point where they go public with information. It's so stressful. It's such a horrendous experience. because you worry all the time. And I'm sure Dave wouldn't mind me mentioning this, but at one stage a while back, I had an opportunity to speak to his mum. And when I realized he was going to be okay? His mum. She's such a lovely woman. She's a really good, strong, loving mum who's so proud of her son. And she just wanted to say thank you because she's watched everything that I've said, because I felt it really important, because there's been such a concerted, very deliberate and quite malicious attempt by certain debunkers to try and undermine Dave by ridiculous crap, about his body language and all of that sort of stuff. And so I just thought it was really important to get out there in a proactive way as a journalist and just explain who he is, why it's so important that he be acknowledged as a person of great reputation. And I have to be honest, I didn't realize that she'd watched every single one of the presentations that I'd done, and she knew them all. She could speak to each of them. And I just think, look, the guy is a hero. And I think the thing I had, the strong sense I had, George, watching on from Australia, was an enormous sense of unfolding history. Okay, he wasn't able to say a great deal that he hadn't already said to me in the interview. In fact, he said less than he said to me in the interview. But the overwhelming sense that I had was one of pride and an enormous sense that history was unfolding, because I reckon probably in 10 years' time, 5-10 years' time, or probably even earlier, Dave Grush will be remembered as, and still be remembered and still be honoured as a great American, a patriot who played a huge role in bringing to light an absolute criminal scandal. I mean, I am gobsmacked. I mean, you just stop me now before I go off on a rant.
No, I want to ask you a direct question. So, are all Australians as straight to the balls like you are in interviews?
My wife tells me I swear too much on the podcast, so I'm actually going to be polite because basically, apparently there's a meme out there where I say "fuck 'em," and
it's the greatest. It's almost as good as George's ice pick meme that was put out. It's really great. Hey, but guys, so Bryce, I want to come to you quick. By the way, Ross, when you came to my secret location, I call my home, my secret home, and we talked, I knew immediately, we talked about George Knapp's history in this and how you are, who you are in reporting in Australia, how you've put yourself into that position of trying to find out the truth, and you put your reputation on the line. And I know you and George can really relate to each other on that level. I think, look, I have no problem because I don't have a reputation to kill. But Bryce, you've been involved in this for a long time. And from what I know, you did like a secret recording with Dave Grush prior to the one that you and Ross released, that is the official one. And I know that one won't see the light of day and it didn't say anything different, but I know that you were a big part of this. And I want to both honor that because I haven't seen your face a lot about this. And I know you and Ross have worked really hard together on this. Can you tell me from your perspective, what is it like for you being so involved in the UFO topic for so many decades now, where you and Ross are working together and you have this secret recording before, which again, is never getting out and you're never showing it, but it's really the same stuff. But you guys really protected Dave together, and you're protecting him as a human, whether or not you at that moment believe him, if you've done your vetting or not, you were part of that. And I want to hear from your perspective, because you've been involved for so long with the UFO thing, and I've always admired your work. Please tell us what that's like. Tell us what's going on.
Gentlemen, look, you're all being kind. I look at the three of you as primary movers and shakers on the Dave Grush story. I'm a secondary player on it, and I'm lucky to have had my moment to observe history. But this is Ross's story that he broke in terms of putting Dave Grush on camera. And you guys, of course, knew Dave Grush going back, I believe, well over a year. And so a lot of other people broke the Grush story. The three of you, also Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal, And I was lucky to be at Ross's side and sort of his wingman for the final part of it. So you're all being very kind, but you guys, really, the credit goes there.
Okay, but I'm asking what
I get it. I get it. I just wanted to make sure that I'm not standing on the same Scott Carlin all had lunch together. And I think, and Ross, correct me if I'm wrong, because maybe I'm telling this wrong, but I think it came up at lunch that maybe we should record that day in case Dave either changed his mind because he was supposed to be recording the very next day for the News Nation interview. And I think it came up at lunch that wouldn't it be good to sort of give him a chance to face the camera, see what that felt like. And in case we showed up at the News Nation interview, only to see Dave get arrested or God forbid us as well and hauled away by federal agents, we should put him on camera. So
you told
we
me about that all along the way. And that is correct, is that there was a worry, like a real worry. And he trusted you guys. We talked extensively about this, like what happens the next move when he showed George full ICIG. It was like, so he trusted you guys. And I know, so Ross brings you to this table, you guys sit down. And was there a sense of, for you guys, urgency that like something bad might happen, that you should do this?
I mean, I can speak to this a little bit. I'm sorry to interrupt, Bryce, but I was really worried that frankly, I think the intelligence community knew that Leslie and Ralph were working on a story, but I'd been dealing with Dave solidly in a form where I was hoping that our communications weren't being monitored in any way. And I wanted to keep it that way. And I'm not sure that they had any idea that Dave was traveling to Los Angeles to do the interview that he did with me. Because essentially what we wanted to do was wrong foot any attempt, if such an attempt occurred, to stop Dave from getting a broader platform. And I think possibly the people who don't want this story told were under the assumption that all that was going to happen was that Leslie and Ralph were going to try and put their story in the New York Times or the Washington Post. And frankly, I'll say it, I think the fix was in. I think they were convinced that they could stop that story running in the New York Times and the Washington Post. And I think they thought that if they did that, the story would be effectively neutralized. So I was paranoid that there might be some monitoring of Dave when he arrived in Los Angeles to do the interview that he did with me. And Dave's, I mean, honestly, the guy is an expert in counter surveillance anyway, but I was very strongly paranoid anyway with me. And Dave's, I mean, honestly, the guy is an expert in counter surveillance anyway, but I was very strongly paranoid, as most journalists are at the best of times, to ensure that we got anything with Dave. And Bryce's son, Jared, did a fantastic job just doing a backup interview, which we essentially did as an emergency in the event that anybody tried to stop Dave from doing the full News Nation recording.
The decision was made, well, maybe we should record this. And the question, this is so funny because it's how history happens. We're like, well, who's going to record it? And how do we even do this? And we're all at lunch right now. So I ended up calling my son, Jared, who is a filmmaker and has just finished his first feature film. And I said, hey, can you meet us at my house to record this thing? And his first, consideration was, well, I don't know. I'm kind of working on this or that. To which I said, I'll give you $500. And he said, what time do you need me there? I said, come now. And of course he did. And people would like us to just throw this interview out. And I think ultimately in historical transparency, someday it may be, but
I'm sorry I said that before. You're right. You should talk with Dave. That's your guys' decision. But I think you're right. Historically, at some point, even that extra stuff, but I think it happened the right way, right?
Well, here's what's interesting, though. Dave Grush, this was a casual meeting. Dave Grush is wearing shorts in this interview that Ross does. So it wasn't ever meant for air. It wasn't, and it's being shot by my son. And there's a Lois and Clark poster in the background where we were shooting it. So it was all kind of crazy like that. But it did give everybody a sense that okay, we're doing this and we've at least got this in our pocket. And I do remember asking my son afterwards, because listen, I knew what it meant and Ross knew what it meant and Dave certainly knew what it meant. But here's my son who's got no clue whatsoever about what we're doing. I said afterwards, well, what do you think of this? And his attitude was like, is this guy really telling the truth? I mean, more than, and I said, yeah, I think he is. And he was like, wow. Okay.
Isn't that
glad
right?
I was here. Thanks for calling me. So he didn't give me the $500 back, but he did thank me for involvement.
So Bryce, so two things. One is that's so funny the way that you say that. Like people think there's some sort of Machiavellian master plan of manipulation to get information out through a deep, dark under government, that everybody's being fooled, that he's a psyops. And you and I know this is like Inspector Crusoe of UFOs. We hit the gold mine sometimes, but we are navigating uncharted territories without a map. I mean, this is insane. So what's your son's name? And can you tell everybody what his movie is or something cool?
Yeah, absolutely. His name is Jared Zabels. I guess my whole take on him was, I'm the son of a history teacher. My father, who's not with us anymore, would have been so proud of this moment because he taught history, but to see his son involved in history would be something for him. I think Dave Grush is the real deal, but I think George and Ross know it better than I do.
Ross.
It's amazing to me that people, particularly people on the UFO, UAP social media circuit, actually even bother to speculate about such a possibility that Dave is a PSYOP operation. To me, it's utterly implausible. But the reason why I think it's most implausible is because I don't mind telling you, I mean, privately, because of the research that I was doing for my book, I was led to a guy by the name of Nat Kobitz, who sadly has passed away, who was essentially the head of research and development for the US Navy, the chief geek for the US Navy. And I was very vague about this in my book, but Nat introduced me to a number of people. And those people, quite a while back, told me about Dave Grush, about this guy making inquiries about the fact that there was a legacy program. And the people that I'm talking about are people who work in the legacy program, who are, in some cases, military, in some cases, scientists, who are aware, allegedly, of a crash retrieval reverse engineering program. So when I was introduced to David, I already felt very secure in the fact that he was who he said he was. And I also felt very secure about his motivations because I know the caliber of the man and I've been privileged. I mean, it's kind of weird. I mean, I actually think being an Australian has really worked for me in this investigation. I was really worried when I first started out, nobody would want to talk to me. But I think because we Australians have followed America in every sad war, and I spent most of my lifetime covering deployments of Americans and Australians into horrible wars in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. And I've been in combat. I've been in horrible situations with American soldiers covering my back in Afghanistan and Iraq. And the thing that I've learned is the huge respect and the relationship between my country and yours. And when I started reaching out to people trying to verify David's bona fides, I was amazed at the caliber and the seniority of the people who spoke as highly as they did of him. In fact, I've never, in the effort that I did, I actually spent extra time trying to find dirt on Dave because it just seemed so implausible to me that the guy was such a straight arrow. Yeah. You know, and he really is who he says he is. And I even have access to his performance reviews. I mean, he's extremely highly spoken of. People who've worked with him describe him as an exemplary, an incredibly impressive intelligence officer. And that's why he found himself at such a young age given access, literally, the keys to the kingdom. The man is privy to the most important secrets in America. And there's no way he's going to tell me or you or George or Bryce those secrets. You know, he's a patriot through and through.
Let's drill that home. So Ross, I want to ask you one last thing, then I need George to answer, but let's drill that home. there have been people that have tried to get me and George to say that David Grush gave us classified information so they could go directly after him. Has that happened to you? In short, because you throw bombs like it's World War II, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You got no problem, Ross. You just throw bombs. So shoot me straight.
Dave has not provided me.
Two things. Has Dave ever crossed the line with you? First question.
No, it's infuriating. He won't. He's such a straight arrow. He is absolutely religiously, rigidly committed to not crossing the line. The reason I know the truth bombs that I know is because of a vast array of sources that I've been privileged to be able to develop. And those sources have trusted me, and I will never reveal their identity unless they want me to. Some of them are at the stage where they might be prepared to testify, and a large part of what they've been doing for the last few weeks is waiting with anticipation to see how Dave gets treated by Congress.
100%. And so now, next question before we go to George to answer the whole, is he an intel operative, kind of, dissuading the public. Before we answer that, Ross, my second question to you is, because you throw bombs like they're atomic, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want an honest answer, or tell me you can't say, and I'll do the same. George and I will do the same. Bryce, you do the same. Are any of the people that you've been speaking with prior to actually knowing Dave, have they had hands-on experience with actual full craft or any component of the craft firsthand? These people you can't name, yes or no?
Yes. In some cases, those people weren't told what they were looking at, but they were aware that what they were looking at was not human technology.
And in some cases, they were told what they were looking at, right, Ross?
Affirmative.
Okay. George, what do you say about Grush being some sort of PSYOP agent?
When we first met Dave, and it was amazing timing because Jeremy had a camera on me at this conference, this UFO conference, SCU, at the moment that Dave came up and introduced himself. We were not entirely, so it was captured. That moment was captured. Not on purpose, it just happened. And we sort of knew it was coming. We knew that we were going to meet some people there and be able to talk to them. And, I happen to like Dave right off the bat. One reason he had credibility with me and with Jeremy is because we know the people that he worked with, that he, UAP task force folks who in essence gave him the assignment of digging into these special access programs to see what's what, see where things are hidden. So already knew he had credibility with them, and that went a long way with us. It was funny, you guys weren't able to hear this, but at the hearing in Washington this week, this congressional hearing, so we're sitting next to Chuck McCullough, his attorney, Jeremy on one side, me on the other, and every time a question was directed to Dave, Chuck would give him a one-word direction, no. And was almost always no.
He'd say no, not no. Usually he'd say careful, Dave.
Because I think that what I heard most was no.
Really? Yeah.
Meaning, no, don't answer that. And then there'd be a slight little delay, 1, 2, 3 beats, and then Dave would explain why he couldn't say anything more. And, I think probably a lot of people watching this thing at home would be frustrated. Well, why can't he answer that stuff? Oh, he's trying to protect himself. He's in very precarious legal position right now. Even though there are supposedly whistleblower protections, there are things that he cannot say, not in public. But the effect was that I think it whetted Congress's appetite for more info. They were pissed that they couldn't get him in a skiff to talk about these things on the record, although in a classified setting. They were ticked off that there had been these roadblocks thrown up for a committee of Congress that's making an actual, investigation into some things that they're supposed to investigate. They have an oversight responsibility in the Constitution. They're supposed to do that. And the fact that they brought this witness who tells them the things that he did tell them were absolutely astonishing. I mean, stuff that Ross, you and Bryce know really well, but the things that he could not answer, I think, had a greater effect. The fact that he could not tell them on the record in a formal hearing under oath. I think that because of the nature of the questions that they asked and the responses that he gave, that he hooked them in a way that he would never hook them before if he had straightforward answered those questions. It was an astonishing moment. It was, hearing Chuck go, "No, don't do that." I had to laugh about it after a while, but I think it had a tremendous effect that was maybe more powerful than if he had straightforward answered all those questions.
George, it's interesting. I take all your points and I actually agree with all of them, but it's interesting. I wake up this morning and I have an email from someone who I haven't heard from in years, someone I worked with on a couple of movies over a decade ago. And here is an email, and it's got no subject, and it says, I hate to say the former military official came across as a complete jackass. End of email. And I wonder, well, first of all, it's one person. It's Street Nielsen's. It doesn't mean anything because, I mean, we've all had hundreds, if not thousands of other people who say, thank God he finally spoke out. But I wonder, George, do you think it's possible that the fact that he had to say, I can't talk about that so many times, while Congress people and folks like us can sort of read between the lines of what that means, that the average person watching it for the whole thing might go, why is he being so hard to come forward?
Well, he's, even though there are whistleblower protections, supposedly, for people like him, he does put himself at risk, in jeopardy, if he says things about these classified programs in a non-classified setting. Dave wants to tell Congress what he knows. He wants to tell them about these programs and where things are hidden. And you know what? As that hearing went on, they asked more pointed questions. Who are the people who are pulling this stuff? Who is lying to us? What are these programs? How much money has been diverted from legitimate national security programs to keep this thing going? And where is the stuff? Where are the goodies? Where's the bodies? Where's the craft? He's willing to tell them that, but he has to tell them in a proper setting where he doesn't have a risk of going to prison. And I'm pretty sure, Ross, that you've gone over this quite a bit with him about what he could say and couldn't say. And you probably had to make some tough editorial decisions in order to protect your source, your guy who was going on camera.
Yeah, I'm in the weird position, George. You're absolutely right. I'm in the weird position where I know from other sources a lot of what Dave can't talk about and which I can't talk about publicly. And so the thing that I think a lot of people, and it saddened me really, that people don't understand this. I can't, and I would never encourage Dave to do anything to breach his security oath. I don't think we should ever, frankly, be publishing things that are national security secrets. It's one of the reasons why I personally take the view that Julian Assange sadly crossed a line when he did what he did. I think there's a really important thing.
Ross? How explain that to people? How did Julian Assange? Because you're a reporter, so how did Julian Assange cross the line? Tell us how.
I've been sent material from time to time, Jeremy, where I've opened the packet and it's got top secret on it. It's an SCI, it's a compartmentalized document, and I know I shouldn't have it.
So what do you do?
I've sent it back.
To the sender, or did you report it in?
I wouldn't dob in the person who sent it to me.
I want to make sure, right? That's what people understand.
I've made sure that I don't use national security documents, because one of the things that journalists also have a responsibility to do is to make sure that we protect the people who are doing good work, laudable work, for intelligence gathering and for the defense of both of our countries. And often I've realized as a journalist, there are things that I learn about that I shouldn't know about. And it's a very delicate balancing act. I can remember at the time of the last Gulf War, when Australia was about to deploy to Iraq, I became aware from a source completely by accident that the special forces of my country were being deployed to the western desert of Iraq a couple of days before the invasion was due to begin. I literally knew about the deployment of special forces troops into an area of the western desert of Iraq that was hugely nationally security sensitive. And, I was being offered this as a story by somebody who rang me up about it. And I said to them, look, I urge you, please do not publish that story. Do not do anything to further circulate it around the media. Please have a think about what you're doing, because they were excited about the fact that they were able to give me this information. And there is, as we all know, there are people in the secret world who get off on sharing things. And there's a kind of a culture of, I know something you don't. And as a journalist, I've learned that I have to be quite careful to make sure that I don't reveal things that compromise sources and methods. And that's my feeling very strongly with protecting somebody like Dave when he comes forward and says that he can't reveal national security information. And even though all of us would think, oh, bugger it, just basically say it, say it. What are they going to do? Prosecute you? It's not our lives. You can go to jail if you want, but hell, let's just run it. There's no way you would do that, because as a journalist, you have a huge obligation to make sure that you're protecting your source. And I actually go to the extent of, because I was trained as an attorney, I actually go to the extent of explaining to people, look, the ramifications of what you're saying to me now are that you could be putting yourself in a position where you're revealing things that are national security sensitive. This could expose you, in my country, to prosecution under the Official Secrets Act. And I've had an experience like that once, where I was working on the PBS equivalent in Australia for a show called Four Corners, and a whole lot of spies working for our intelligence service were really angry about the way the intelligence service was run. It was our equivalent of the CIA. And they started revealing operations to me all over the world that our Secret Service was involved in, many of them plausibly deniable operations that we were doing for the Americans that under no circumstances should I reveal. And I had this head full of incredibly sensitive operations that were still ongoing. And when I revealed one issue, which was that Australian spies were bugging Chinese government officers in Hong Kong for the British government to help the British government secure an advantage in negotiations with the Chinese government. The intelligence services came down on me like a ton of bricks, and there was an inquiry and like a kind of a grand jury investigation. And when I explained all the other operations that I knew that I hadn't revealed, I think there was the beginning of a realization by the intelligence services that journalists like me do make a very measured decision about what we don't publish, what we do publish. And in Dave's case, it was obvious to me that under no circumstances, he's sticking his bloody neck out in a way that I would never do. I'm sorry. I just think he's the most courageous person. I mean, the risks that he is taking by doing what he's done are extraordinary. And he's doing it for the very noblest of reasons, for constitutional reasons, because your beautiful, great country has lost its way on this incredibly important issue. A secret has been kept for far too long. And even the people keeping that secret have privately admitted to me, some of them, it's utterly ridiculous that it's still being kept, and utterly indefensible that it's being kept. And so Dave needs to be protected to make sure that he doesn't put himself in a position where he's breaching national security sensitive information. And I feel that strongly, religiously, because I've seen people in circumstances where they've either inadvertently or as in Julian Assange's case, leaked information that frankly was recklessly published. I'm very sorry. Whilst I admire his motives in revealing a lot of the things that he did reveal, I'm very sorry. I just don't think he was discriminating enough about what he did publish. And it's one of the things that annoys me is that he's often described as a journalist, and he's not, and he never was.
So Julian Assange, from what I understand from the people that I know and have insight, is that he taught people how to steal. That was his biggest crime. So if that's the delineating line, and I don't know, because between the four of us, we have 100 years of journalism experience, but really, I'm just saying how old you guys are, that you each got about 30 years, right? I got like 10. So I'm looking to you guys to figure out how to do this. And George being kind of the OG of all of this with the UFO thing, right? Being in there from the get-go, you're kind of stigmatized as being onto something early and being on the mainstream news with this, George, for 30 plus years. So let me ask you this. You know, we do our best, George, not only to vet, but to protect national security. However, we are patriots. We believe that there are things that should be kept secret. You and I disagree a little bit, George. I'm kind of more a grenade kind of guy, but I respect it and I follow the line. I want to ask you, George, which is, when you're vetting things and when we put stuff out, the idea is to not harm any national security issues. And we're very freaking careful, like more than people know, like patience, like crazy. But where is that line for you, George? And then I want to ask you also, Bryce, of as a journalist, when you find something of interest to, let's just say, the United States or beyond, how do you decide what line you're willing to walk in order to inform the American and global public, George? How have you done that over the years? And then, because now we're talking about Assange and all that, and this is different. And then I want to go to Bryce after. But what do you think, George? How do you do that, man?
You know, sometimes it's just gut. The exact decision-making process is imprecise. Sometimes with somebody like Dave Grush, my impression of him from the beginning was this guy is for real, because of what I'd known about him from people he worked with. He's a hero. He is putting his neck on the line. He's putting everything at risk because he could go to prison for saying the things that he is saying. He's a patriot. He wants the public to know. He doesn't think that the secrecy is legit. There are a lot of times when I've received information, as Ross has, and probably Bryce too, of people whose motives are not pure. It's punitive. It's somebody who's pissed off at their former boss who wants to spill something that's embarrassing, and me reporting it would be detrimental to our country and probably would cross the line in terms of national security stuff. There are things that I love secrets. We all love to learn secrets. Doesn't mean you always report those secrets, you know. So, you know, for Dave, we got to know him over a period of time, but I liked him right off the bat.
What do you do, George? What do you do? What do you do? What do you do when you're in that position, which you and I have been in together so many times now, we are currently in, where people are giving you credible information, but for maybe potentially personally wrong reasons? How do you, as a veteran journalist who's covered this beat from the beginning as a news story, how do you navigate what the public should and can know? Or what, do you go behind the scenes? Do you work with people? What do you do?
Again, it's imprecise, and sometimes it's case by case basis, and you're weighing things. What are the motives of the people that are releasing this? What the effects of the release would be? Does it cross a line, and does it hurt the country? Is this a secret that's being kept that should not be kept? Those are judgmental calls, and I'm not always right on those things.
I'm going to call you out. I'm going to call you out right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the deal. You tried to put on congressional record a 140-page document generated by an intelligence agency, all on the Tic Tac. You showed it to certain individuals that would have the power to put that on congressional record, and people were threatened by the idea of you doing it, if not threatened directly, and you didn't put it on congressional record. Tell me why.
Sometimes you have to protect sources even from themselves. You have to, what is in the long range interests of both the story and the people who are providing you with the information. The report that I tried to introduce into the record for this congressional hearing would have got somebody in really bad trouble. It is not classified. The report I'm talking about is not classified, but it hasn't been authorized for release. And if I had released it, as I wanted to do, I think it could really have deleterious effects on the life of the people who share this information with me.
George, it wasn't one person. There was a lot of people that would get in trouble, just to be clear. And the second thing is we have to explain why it's not classified. And I think this is at the core of what the four of us know, which is that programs like this may operate under a classified setting, yet subcontractors are used to evade freedom of information. So it's inherently unclassified because of the generation origin of it. However, it is underneath the auspice of a classified compartmentalized program. So just to be clear to the audience who might not speak this language, because I'm learning it as I go, right? This is why what George was going to put on congressional record, 140-page detailed analysis, scientific analysis of the Tic Tac UFO encounters of multiple craft above 80,000 feet, as Commander Fravor said, in space, right? That Commander Fravor hasn't even seen, nor Commander Chad Underwood, who was on the last episode of Weaponized, who filmed the Tic Tac UFO, hasn't seen. The world hasn't seen it. You made a choice not to put this on congressional record to protect sources. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, yeah. I want honesty, because everybody else is Hall of Mirrors and spooky. The four of us, man, we have to be absolutely straight with everybody. If we can't say, we can't say, but we got to say we can't say.
Yeah, I want to diverge into this conversation about, we talk about UFO world and how they view things. And when the list of witnesses was made public a week ago, all the bitching and moaning, which was, predictable, inevitable. No one's ever happy with anything in UFO world. But Dave Fravor, Ryan Graves, Dave Grush, well, those guys, we've heard their story. That's old news. We've heard them in TV interviews. As great as the interview that Dave Grush did with Ross and with Bryce, as great as it is not the same as being under oath in front of a congressional committee on the record for the world to see. It is not the same thing. It is a much different context. The same thing for Dave Fravor. Dave Fravor, I loved all three of those witnesses, but Dave Fravor oozes credibility. And for people to think, the Tic Tac thing was old news, it's not old news. It may be the most important UFO case of all time because of A, how well documented it is, B, the quality of the witnesses, the sensor systems, the video, and C, that it played such a central role in that New York Times story of December 2017 that blew this thing up, that changed UFO world forever. So somebody complaining that Dave Fravor shouldn't be worthy of appearing before that congressional committee is preposterous. Him telling the story of Tic Tac all over again and going into great detail, and then followed Ryan Graves, who expands that conversation further to say a lot of aviators, pilots, military and commercial, are seeing these things and they don't know what to do. They don't know where to report it. They're in fear for their careers and their credibility. And then to top it off with Dave Grush, oh my gosh, I thought those three witnesses were terrific. I know that UFO people like to bitch and moan, and that's their full-time job is. But that lineup that establishes a baseline of information for Congress that they can use to now go beyond it and set up the next headline hearing, I thought it was terrific, just terrific.
Bryce, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to go with George and diverge a little bit into what he was talking about because although I've worked as an investigative reporter, I didn't deal with classified information. I was more about, taking down doctors who were injuring patients, things like that. Here's my take, though, on the hearing and why there's some confusion, because it wasn't just UFO world, it was also media world and anchor world. Part of it was the mix and match nature of David Grush and Fravor and Graves, because they're all terrific witnesses. However, what happened is the Dave Grush was clearly defined as a whistleblower, and so the anchors who have 15 seconds of thought before they go into an interview got, oh, whistleblower, got it. And so I literally, and I'm sure it happened to all three of you guys, when interviewed, the anchor would say, well, the three whistleblowers speaking today or speaking the next day, and they weren't whistleblowers. Grush is the whistleblower, and both Fravor and Graves were people who have already told their story freely and openly. And so as a consequence, what happened is that there was that confusion about that they were all breaking this whistleblowing news. And the thing is, and while I agree with everything you said, George, but it's true that if we'd had a series of hearings, the first hearing might very well have been just set the baseline, set the predicate for what was to come. And boy, you couldn't have better people than Fravor and Graves to do that. They have firsthand, people that want, I got to have firsthand information. All right, well, there's two pilots that have firsthand information, but they weren't whistleblowers. And so in reality, it would have been great to use the pilot military thing to get people in the tent and then go to a whistleblower and have other witnesses who could support Grush and say, yeah, I had experience with the things he's talking about. But again, I don't produce congressional hearings. That was just my take. But there was confusion on that part of it. And I think that that probably got some people riled up. I got another text today by somebody who just said what I'm sure you've all heard from, as you called it, George, UFO world, where the concern was, well, okay, I need proof. Well, okay, Grush has proof, but he has more evidence. I mean, he has evidence he can tell people in classified situations, whereas that was different for the other two guys. So there was confusion. There remains a little confusion on this thing, and I'm just here to straighten it out for some people. Grush is your whistleblower. He's the guy that is protected under the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, as it was passed last year. These other two guys have been around, but I take your point, George, and I want to underline it. What a great way to bring people who've never heard their story into the story. Let them hold up their hand and say, I promise to tell the whole truth. Let them be a firsthand witness. I found Fravor and Graves completely credible and compelling, but in a completely different way than I found David Grush credible and compelling. That's my take.
So good, and I appreciate you clarifying that for the audience. And I want to get Ross's take on it, but I do want to speak on something because I have direct knowledge of it. George, it's okay to say, right, like the involvement that we had in all this?
Right.
Okay, so here's the deal. This was not an accident. So I personally talked with David Fravor and David Grush. In fact, you heard David Fravor kind of like he had a pest of a friend. His first ever audio. I was talking with Fravor.
You're the pest.
I'm the pest. I've been talking with Fravor way before. I said, it'll never leak from me. I promised him that. How he found out his story got out, he was at work. And I called him. I said, turn on the fucking TV. So I earned his trust by not spilling the beans for 4 years. Then we get to this point where I talk with everybody. They're all my friends. So this is not something like spooky or whatever. I'm not Svengaliing shit. But I was like talking with primarily Congress individuals and then also oversight. And there was this kind of friction. So I was setting up the witnesses. I had 2 more witnesses, both from legacy programs via George and George's relationships that were at more than 50. They were at 50% yes or more. So it got whittled down. It got whittled down from what it was going to be. But what we ended up with was perfect. So not with Ryan. I didn't help set that up because I knew he was already set up, right? But those 2 witnesses, it was, meaning David Grush and David Fravor, with Ryan being asked by oversight on his own was so perfect. George and I stepped back and we had our written testimonies put on congressional record, and that's great. But really hearing those three people, it set the stage for what? It set the stage to give permission for people like Ross and George, people that are ready to break from the fold and tell the truth to the American public and want to so bad, but they're just looking to see. They have permission now if we treat David Grush properly as a protected witness. So your contribution, Ross and Bryce, of getting him on camera, making him comfortable, protecting him, getting him there on News Nation all across the world, that was such a critical moment to this entire thing that's going on, that's been going on a long time, and people are just catching up. It sounds wild because they haven't been paying attention, and I don't blame them. Everybody's got a day job, hopefully a beautiful wife and puppies like me. So here's the deal. We get to this point where it takes journalists like all of us to acquire information, to be patient, to bring it to people in power, to try to help the infighting to get it to this point. So now this was not an accident. This was an opening. It's an invitation. That's all we've achieved, is an invitation for the truth now. And that's what I'm so excited about. So Ross, I want to ask you now very specifically, what did we achieve and what does this lead to?
I think the hearing is the first stepping stone in what's going to be both a private and public exposition of a series of shocking witness revelations. I think that eventually, probably within 6 months to a year, we will be in the situation where everything David Grush says has been fully verified and corroborated by multiple witnesses from within the legacy program and within the military and intelligence community. That's certainly my aspiration, my hope. I've spoken as recently as today to people who thought, and of course I haven't seen what they've seen. They say that they're part of the legacy program, or they're aware that they're involved in the legacy program, and they're very happy the way that David has been treated. I think there's a nervousness about the way that politics works in the Hill, and I think everybody's going to wait to see now, because let's be honest about it, one of the issues with the Oversight Committee is there's a question mark from my sources that it actually has the clearances to even hear the evidence that David wants to talk about in even a classified setting. It's, some of what he's talking about is so secret that in order for the people to be allowed to actually sit in the room, they have to have the correct compartmented top secret clearances to be able to hear it. And there's a question mark as to whether or not the Oversight and Accountability Committee is the correct forum for that. But what we all
that's a misnomer, Ross. Like, tell me if I'm wrong, you guys, but from what I understand, there is nothing higher than top secret. Compartmentalized, I get. They are able to be read in. That was a big discussion, I think, yesterday, which is that the overclassification is an issue. There is nothing higher than top secret clearance. The question is...
No, you're right. There is nothing higher than top secret clearance, but it's whether the powers that be would allow that particular membership of that particular committee to be read into those compartmented programs. And it's much easier for the Senate and the House Intelligence Committees to be the ones, or the Armed Services Committees to be the ones that are the recipients of this information.
But talk about that. Hold on. I'm going to stop you now. Talk about that, dude. So here's the deal.
Sure.
What you're saying, and it is correct from my understanding, is that it's not a matter of clearance. It's a matter of guardianship that is actually illegal. So is that how you understand it? Who has the right? Is that right?
Yeah, basically, maybe if I explain it this way,
okay.
I'm aware that the Congress already has corroboration of what David has specific information about. Witnesses began going to the Congress and giving very specific information about the legacy program 2 years ago. And that information has been heard by the HPSI, the House Permanent Select Committee for Intelligence, and the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence, and also, I suspect, the Armed Services Committee. And the only reason it happened in those committees is because of certain people on those committees who were motivated to hear that evidence, and the dedication of staffers and people in the intelligence community that basically wanted this information put before the correct oversight committees. Because ultimately, this is if there has been a failure of accountability, and I strongly believe there has been, it's the oversight committees, the intelligence oversight committees of Congress that are the ones that are the key fulcrum points where this revelation will occur. And so it kind of amused me a little bit yesterday, because the idea that this is all going to be a revelation to Congress is a bit of a misnomer. Congress already knows the shit that Dave Grush knows. And let's not pretend. There are transcripts of that evidence which motivated Chuck Schumer in particular, the Senate Majority Leader, to do what he did, which is pass that incredible legislation, which essentially describes in black and white the fact that there has been a cover-up. I mean, it's not saying if or maybe. It categorically asserts. I actually have the legislation here on my desk, and I periodically pick it up and read it just to remind myself that this is a draft bill in the US Congress, because it actually sets out in black and white, and it's not being reported too. That's the thing that shocks me.
So we're going to help with that. We're going to help with that.
One of the most powerful people in Congress has sanctioned, clearly with White House approval, legislation that sets out explicitly that the Atomic Energy Act was misused improperly to conceal stuff improperly, probably criminally. I mean, I just find it amazing that the media, a lot of the legacy media, are not realizing the awesome significance of what is there in black and white. And so what's behind that, the reason why Chuck Schumer is so strong on this, we all know, is because other witnesses have already backed Grush to the hilt. And so there are going to be more hearings, yes, but the Congress already knows what Dave Grush knows.
Okay, so when you say a couple things, I want to clarify, George, I need you to jump in here. So when you talk about people knowing, I'll say it is surreal to me to have phone calls with people, very candid. So George and I will call people from different countries who are dealing with national security issues, who have direct testimony from hands-on people working with what they call craft not made here on earth, is the famous term. Multiple countries. George and I have been on the phone with people in national security roles, and you can affirm this if you want or not, George. And they have told us straightforward, off record, what's going on. And it's surreal for me, Ross, when I watch television and I see certain people who we know who are just tiptoeing onto the truth when they know so much more. And I understand why they're doing it. But I want to throw this to George now. When everybody's saying the legacy program, that is not the right term we should be using, because you all know that there are multiple legacy UFO exploitation programs, either through intelligence or through hardware, that have been durational, they have been multi-agency, and we have direct knowledge of that. I want to be open and transparent to our audience. George, when we talk about a legacy program, can you tell us as much as you feel comfortable that there are multiple legacy programs, meaning multiple UFO programs running for generations through multi-agency, and you and I only know of, let's say, a handful, but there are more. And so can you tell us a little bit, when you say legacy programs, not just like one UFO program, can you tell us anything about that without hurting sources?
Well, I was thinking about it yesterday. I'll share some sort of personal observations in the aftermath of that hearing in DC. It still hasn't hit me yet, the magnitude of what was revealed and the fact that it has gone this far. I'm still absorbing it. but it's 36 years ago that I did my first UFO interview about legacy programs. I didn't call them that at that time, but that there are programs where they have crashed saucers, recovered saucers, reverse engineering, alien bodies. And I remember reporting it back then. I was kind of stupid at the time, really, going forward and thinking that people would accept it because I'm a news guy and I'm telling them the truth. And looking at it now, of course, obviously that was not the case. I got all kinds of shit for it for a long time. Fast forward 36 years, and there's a hearing in front of Congress where a guy named Dave Grush is appearing there and saying, yeah, these legacy programs are real, and we do have this material. We have been reverse engineering. There are bodies somewhere. It is overwhelming to me to see that amount of change that I never thought I would see in my lifetime. Are there legacy UFO programs? Yeah. How many? I don't know. I don't even know. But there are a bunch of them.
But you know of more than one that we call a legacy program. We have known for a long time of more than one. We're not going to give a number, but let's be honest with everybody, is we are 100% tangibly, physically, and beyond a shadow of a doubt aware of multiple ongoing multi-agency UFO exploitation and reverse engineering programs, as well as human intelligence stuff regarding UAP, right?
Well, yeah. Yes. And then I think Dave Grush, without being really specific with this congressional committee a couple of days ago, said that. You know, he made it very clear that there are a bunch of them. His job, his assignment from the UAP task force, you know, he's with NGO and he's working with the task force, was to oversee, look at special access programs. Ross, 2,000 of them that he was looking at. And there were a bunch of them that had some connection to this program, this overall effort related to UAP. I don't know how many there are. I'm not sure that even Dave Grush knows how many they are because
we don't know how many there are, but it's not one.
Yeah, for sure. I think that there are probably some of them that are even outside what we call special access programs in some other realm that go on that aren't even on the books anywhere. I thought it was really interesting, the political reactions from members of Congress. The fact that 4 other people got appointed to this committee just to be there for this hearing was amazing. The fact that AOC and Tim Burchett are agreeing on an issue is absolutely astonishing. When you think about the polarization in Washington right now, they don't agree on anything. You've got AOC and Tim Burchett on the same side about UAP transparency. You have Jamie Raskin and Matt Gaetz agreeing on something. By the way, Matt Gaetz, who takes nothing but crap from the media in this country, was terrific. He was terrific in his, and he was pissed. He was pissed that he was denied access to information. Luna, she's in her first term. I don't know her at all, but she was great. That committee, you know, they get staff that prepares questions and materials for them. They were all into it. Every single one of them was into it. They were asking really pointed follow-up questions that they had thought about. It's not something that some staff member had provided to them. They were thinking about it. We are in a new age. I never thought I would see this ever in my life. But we're in a new age. And I swear to God, after that hearing yesterday, Dave Grush, Dave Fravor, Ryan Graves, this is a genie that cannot be put back in the bottle. It's really exciting. It's incredibly exciting.
I just got a personal story because that's what makes these episodes fun for people to watch, is kind of the behind the scenes. Man, I was looking at George, he's walking. I was worried about him. I was like, what's wrong? And he's like, finally, after all these years, they're telling the truth.
Yeah.
It was shocking to him. I want to get into one more subject before we even start to wrap up, but that's fair to say, George, you're shocked after all this time, right?
It was overwhelming. It was a strange feeling. Yeah, shocked. Not exactly shocked, but I was hopeful that this would happen someday. And now it's happening. It's unfolding. It's history in the making. The world is changing right before our eyes. I mean, it is changing big time. It's an amazing thing to behold.
You're like a George is like a pacifist. I'm like the eternal optimist just to fight his pessimism. I'm like, you act like a man that's been burned 100 times on UFO stories. And he goes, yeah, like 1,000. I mean, for me, guys, as a personal thing, it's so fucking cool to see George finally seeing stuff happen that he never would think was going to happen. So I'm going to make sure everybody gets a major rant to throw down what you want. But I want to address one thing because we can't not address this.
Can I just react to George real quickly?
Go ahead, and then we'll do it.
George, you and I are probably, and I'm just guessing here, but I'm pretty sure that you and I are the elder generation of this group. And I have been saying for years to my friends and family, I would just like to get some clarity on this issue before I shuffle off. I would like to not be like my friend Stanton Friedman, who said, why can't I just know some confirmation before I'm gone? And now he's gone. And there's so many other people, James McDonald, all these people that have done all this great work over the years. And that includes you, George. And when you said 36 years ago or something, I just had to smile because it was 35 years ago for me. I wrote and produced a film for the Sci-Fi Channel that had crashed retrievals in it. It had bodies. It had reverse engineering, and part of it was inspired by Whitley Strieber's book that I had read, but the other part was your work. Okay, and I feel that we've been attacking this problem from different points of view. You, at that point, were doing the investigative journalism. I was trying to reflect it in the public sphere. But and while we're all optimistic and everything, I just want to say that the work is still to be done because every morning I have a collection of about a dozen news sites that I just sort of click on it and boom, all of them sort of line up on my screen. And today, before we went on the air, I looked, as I always do, and based on those screens I looked at, there was no hearing in Washington, D.C. yesterday because it wasn't on the front page of any of those sites. So I just say, yes, we do have some work to do. The other thing, just to follow up on what everybody has said, is I don't think any of us are advocating that just because you're in Congress, you get a right to have a skiff briefing from David Grush or anybody else. I mean, think about Representative Fox yesterday, who I think is probably the most vilified of all of the representatives, who used her time to ask Grush a question, let him get a half of an answer in, cut him off just because she wanted to be heard. I don't think that person gets to be in the skiff learning our nation's deepest and darkest secrets. And that leads me to what I think is both of those issues kind of lead me to my sort of uber issue right now, which is the issue we're having is we have to convince people this is real, which means you've got to go beyond what Grush has said in public. He's willing to tell the things that he knows in a classified setting. But the audience that needs to be convinced at this point is the public. And the public is demanding to have some evidence. Some proof. They want to, they want to touch the craft, at least metaphorically. They want to cut open the bodies, at least metaphorically. They want to hear from somebody that's actually done all that. And so I believe we have a public issue right now that we have to figure out how to get this accomplished. We need to provide the public at the same time as we inform the Congress with a sense that this is real. And so I'm willing to, and I'm pushing, and Ross, I know Ross will say, well, there you go again. Because Ross and I, we know each other so well. We talk all the time. We do this show. We're like a scratchy, broken record to each other. But I'm the guy that wrote a book about disclosure a decade ago. And so I loved the word, and I think the word is good, but disclosure tends to imply to a lot of people that you're going to get that, you're going to get 3 terabytes of information dumped on you. And then you can say, oh, there's my proof. I've looked at all the videos. I've seen the bodies. I've seen this. And we know that that's not really going to happen, that kind of disclosure, not anytime soon. And I'm just calling on the Congress and the aerospace industry and the president and everyone else to go for a different word right now, and that's confirmation. What the public wants to know is just, don't give me all this, smoke and mirrors. Don't tell me you're going into a skiff. Just Somebody come out, look in the camera and say, okay, I'm not going to give you all the details. That's because there's national security involved and classifications, and we're sorting through that. But yes, there is a non-human intelligence interacting with humanity. That much we can tell you, and we'll try to fill in the blanks later. That's what we need. We need confirmation. And I do think that the hearing was a great step forward for confirmation, because anyone who saw it actually knows that. But it still isn't the same, because again, my 12 sites on my screen are not talking about this. And how is that possible? A day after this most important hearing that all of us who are on screen right now and all of the people who are listening or watching this, we all know something's going on. We all have our confirmation, but we can't convince our own family members right now. I'm sitting at lunch yesterday with my wife and daughter. They know how important this is. I'm telling them about what I know and how interested I am in it, and how certain friends are interested in it, and they know that I'm working on it, and they're very kind, and they say, well, that's interesting. And then the conversation shifts immediately. And I'm betting each of us on this screen have that with either some of our friends or some of our family. And the only thing that will change that is, I don't care if it's Joe Biden or the president of China or the Pope or the head of NATO, somebody's got to go look at the camera and say, yes, we are dealing with a non-human intelligence.
I need to premise it like this from what you just said. That's already fucking happened.
Yeah.
And nobody fucking believed him. And I don't care whether or not the elephant in the room, if you believe Bob Lazar or not, because some people have more information than other people, so I respect. But we can all agree, you don't need to believe Bob Lazar to know the UFO presence is real. But I will say that what was reported, somebody to the camera spilled the beans, whether you believe his story or not, you now know the story is true. But I also, I'm going to gripe, but I'm going to be honest with you guys. I believe Bob. I believe Bob because I have information that allows me to believe Bob. I don't have the luxury of disbelief. But again, you don't need to. But Ross, I know you've been whispered in the ear of people, and I know who has whispered in your ear, and I know what they've said, and I know where they got it from. Your opinion of Bob Lazar doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is we know the origin of your opinion. So whether or not you believe him, I don't care. But what we need to get to is an agreement on reality, which is this. Bob Lazar came forward and told you a lot of what you're hearing today. The premise of it, the basics. I also know that there are people saying he's full of shit, but I know why they're saying that, what their sources are, and how that's put through a knitting circle of journalists like us. If we look at, and this is my rant, I guess, because I'm passionate about it. If you look at information and how it's been put out to the public, you shouldn't just trust it. When George first came out in 1989, he had no cause to believe Bob Lazar. He just treated it like a news story. And then the second he realized people were officially hiding information from him, he decided not that it was true, but to find out the truth. And I believe that George would say, and he'll talk at his part, that he has found out the truth beyond a shadow of a doubt, to the satisfaction that he needs as a journalist who's broken every fucking major mob and political story in Vegas that's ever happened since he started journalism there. So here's the deal. I want to get on the same page of the elephant in the room for my rant, and then you guys each do your rant. And the same page I want to get on is, isn't it appropriate that we reevaluate the information that Bob Lazar, who started this all with what he said about programs of reverse engineering at Area 51, at Site 4, shouldn't we give it a second look and really reevaluate it because of what we know today from people like Grush and everybody? That's my question. But you guys can rant about whatever you want, even if you don't address my question. But let's go Ross, Bryce, and George.
Okay, I mean, I'm going to have to stay agnostic on Bob. That's what I do in my book. I just don't know. I mean, you've obviously got information that I don't have, and I mean, my one comment with Bob would be that there are just aspects about his claimed educational record, that claims that he's made, that just don't make any sense to me. But I also at one stage spoke to Dave Fruhoff, who worked at Area 51.
He's a good friend of mine. Fruhoff was a good friend of mine, and I actually got him first onto a TV show. And
Sure.
I know what you're about to say. And Ross, I'm not attacking you. I'm trying to clarify to the public. You shouldn't believe Bob. With what you have, if the roles were reversed, Bob, right? But I'm just saying, can we get into this from your perspective? And I appreciate you and I respect your point of view.
What I will say is that irrespective of what Bob Lazar says, there is an incontrovertible new reality that I am aware of, and that I've satisfied myself of, completely independent of Lazar or any claims associated with Bob Lazar. There is indubitably a crash retrieval and reverse engineering program, probably multiple, underway in your country and in allies, associated countries. It's an international relationship.
Expand on that.
I think my country is involved to some degree. I think there are individuals from my country who are involved in the reverse engineering program. The irony is, I know for a fact, very senior members of the executive in my government are completely unaware. And the reason why I think this is possible is because, as I explained earlier, when I was a much younger journalist, probably 35 years ago again, I was talking about an investigation into our international spy service, ASIS, which is our equivalent of the CIA. And I became aware of the relationships that exist between the Five Eyes Alliance, where Australia was being used to do plausibly but deniable favors for its big brother, America. And we would do things where we'd burgle embassies, we would bug buildings, and we would do this to maintain a relationship with our big brothers, America and the UK. And it's in the course of learning about the way in which the Five Eyes Alliance works that I've realized there is this reverse engineering crash retrieval program. And it's in that context that I've been able to inform myself by talking to first-hand witnesses that I am more than satisfied that what we're talking about is a reality. And I don't need Bob Lazar to confirm that. I mean, I'm very fascinated by his case. I spent a lot of time researching it for my book. And, there is arguments for and against. I just don't know. And that's the one thing we should do as journalists is when we don't know, we should admit we just don't know. I just don't have enough data.
Thank you for admitting that, because a lot of people talk out of school. And my point is, let's just look at it. But Ross, let me nail you down here. Do you know for a fact or not a fact that your country is involved in reverse engineering these non-terrestrial craft not made here on Earth? Yes or no?
If I knew it for a fact, I would have published it by now. But okay. I have a strong suspicion that there are individuals from my country who are aware of and either tangentially or directly involved in what would pass for the attempts at a reverse engineering program. And it's because, we have people who are very clever doing certain things. And we also have a large empty country, which is very good for doing things. And I'm at the edge of what I can talk about, but
we're on the edge of our seats. If you crack the Australia story, bro, we are sitting here counting on you to be able to tell us yes or no. Are you involved in reverse engineering in your country? I will never get there, Ross. So we're counting on you to get there.
I'd love to be able to get to the position where I can say that with confidence. It's not happening in my country, but I am aware of Australians who are.
And this was an area of research that the government, I've heard, have pursued and say, hey, is this possible? So one thing I was interested to learn was that plasma can actually make radar returns.
Yeah,
so you could place this out there and actually
free electrons in it, basically, that would reflect the radar. Yeah.
Well, I didn't know that, but I just knew it would reflect it. But, but either way, so So yeah, it seems feasible that you could do that. I've looked into it. What turns me off for that being a real thing are two things. One, the energy requirements to do so, and two, the fidelity of the projection potentially. So the fact that we saw these with the own eyeballs and the fidelity I was described, for me, negates that possibility.
So is this about like an angular accuracy of the beam? I mean, couldn't they have just a really narrow beam? Then it would just be a very precise spot where the plasma was happening? Or are you thinking like the beam would have to spread out?
I think there would need to be multiple beams that are high precision in order to provide the square and the circular shape with the fidelity that existed.
Okay, so it's the spatial precision then.
So I could suggest.
But you didn't see a square and a circle, right? You just saw a spot, right?
Yes, but I didn't see it. But everyone in the squadron were seeing the same item. So although I was one,
okay, so lots of people saw the square and the circle, not just these two guys who had the thing running between them, right?
So for me, that's the fact, and that's still being seen today. I've talked to tens of pilots.
The cube in the sphere. Sorry, the cube in the sphere. That's it.
Cube in the sphere. Yes.
Right. Okay.
So when I think about just the radar and just the AT FLIR, the technology that you described, use plasma, I think is conceivable potentially.
Okay.
But when we add the visual sighting to that, that's where there's a disconnect.
So this is about just the spatial resolution. How fine a beam could you send? I mean, you'd have to do a raster thing. You basically, raster. Just like you do with the TV screen or something.
These objects were 5 to 15 feet in diameter.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it would have to raster. It would have to be extremely high precision. It would have to.
So it's those parameters that seem unrealistic to the people you've talked to. That you could make a fuzzy blob move around, but you couldn't make something with that precision of a shape of a cube inside a sphere, a transparent sphere. Right?
Now, I want to be clear.
I don't know how to make a transparent sphere with the plasma. That sounds tricky to me.
I don't either.
How do you make something that looks like glass with plasma?
That's a tricky one too, because the pilot witness, he specifically stated that it was clear. I added translucent because I have to.
Because you have to see the thing inside.
Exactly.
Right.
You're seeing the clear sphere, so it can't be perfectly clear.
Exactly.
So these are the details that then start making that theory more murky for me. And then when you add on top of the why question, right?
Right.
Why would we be doing this for 8 years and then?
But of course, this also won't explain stuff from say before 1990 or something.
Sure.
None of those they could have. They wouldn't have had the plasma raster technology.
This is just
right?
to be clear to the audience. We're just talking about, at least for me right now, the East Coast experiences essentially.
Right.
Yeah.
That wouldn't work there. And so a lot of us have to look at you and go, well, what's the chance he's in on this and lying, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it must feel weird to know people are looking at you going, what's the chance he's lying?
Yeah, I feel like most people, I don't know, I just assume people don't think I'm lying. I don't know. I don't, because I'm not.
But if we don't think you're lying, then we have to draw these other
data.
conclusions, right? We have to these really big dramatic conclusions. Like either you're lying or our worldview has to change. Like, so which do we want to do?
I'm lying, and also I'm being supported
by a huge infrastructure.
With a huge infrastructure, yes, because my story, I made my statements, and I didn't expect this to happen, but then people FOIA'd documents and things came out, and my story was validated. So you'd have to assume that there was a wider apparatus than just me.
But that would be the story here, right? There's this. I mean, how much would they be willing to spend, basically? Yeah. Could they make a whole carrier group that does this? Presumably, if they made
we're still talking about us, right? Would another nation do this to us?
Could we slip this carrier group into the Soviet Baltic Sea or something to trick them or something? I mean,
why are we tricking our own pilots for almost a decade now?
And trying to trick the Soviet pilots and whatever. I mean, again, there is this plausible thing like just make the other side uncertain if there's a third party, right? That's worth a fair bit. But could you really pull that off inside their organizations?
Mm-hmm.
Like, could you make Soviet pilots see this stuff?
I would assume we'd have to be working towards the same goal to make that happen.
I mean, so this is why this is a hard subject, right? I mean, so I feel this emotional sense of just run away from this. Like, there's not much to win here, right? You're not going to look good. Nobody's going to thank you for this. Like, just go do something else. And I got to bet a lot of other people feel that about this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just run away. Find an excuse and run away. Because, sure, the world needs to know, but you don't have to be the one to tell the world. Let them figure it out some other way, right?
Yeah.
I mean, do you feel that? I mean, so a bunch of your other pilots, they didn't go public, right? They could have. You did. Do you feel like you're different from them because, you felt more of an obligation to do it, or?
I think there's a few considerations there. One was that. Well, I did. I did feel an obligation to do it when I first started speaking out because I knew, like to your point, I was going to be first, more or less, and the risk was going to be on me. But, as I said earlier, the Navy trained me to be an aviation safety officer. And in 2017, I saw the New York...
But all these other officers, they aren't doing this.
I know. But I was also,
you just take this mission more seriously than they do.
Well, you know, the guys that saw the gimbal video and stuff, I mean,
Yeah.
these are my best buddies. I mean,
right?
The guy that we hear in there, who's at my wedding party. We've known each other for about a decade. So, you know, for me, it was insulting and it just pissed me off that this was an issue now that was in the front of the New York Times, and yet I then just called my friends on the East Coast who said, "Yo, of course, yeah, we're flying by these. Like, no one's doing anything. We're almost hitting these things." And I know the lessons in the Navy that we fix things after someone dies and we write our books in blood. And
Right.
this was an opportunity, I felt, that something could be done before we had a catastrophic issue. And it wasn't necessarily a jet's going to hit it, because that could happen, but that's just a risk we take as aviators. It was a strategic and tactical risk that we were potentially exposing ourselves to through an adversary if they were the ones taking advantage of our inability to look at something strange.
So I cited a study of the following in my first book, Age of M. It's a study of employees and what makes them happy. And one set of employees has a concept that their job is like a certain specification of a thing to be done in the world. And other people have their concept of their job as pleasing their boss.
Mm-hmm.
The second group of people tends to be happier in their jobs because they do whatever it takes to please their boss, and then they keep their job and they don't have as much tension. The first group of people, if the concept they have of their job is doing a certain thing, like making the sky safe, well, they have a problem because often their boss disagrees with them about how to implement that job or even whether that job should be done, right? Mm-hmm. So you sound like more that first kind of person. You took the safety course and you think of my job is to keep this guy safe, as opposed to my job is to please my boss.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because otherwise you go to your boss and say, what do you want to hear?
Certainly wasn't pleased with my boss with this, that's for sure.
Right, but that tends to make people unhappy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in some sense, the world runs on those first people, right? In some sense, like a bunch of things don't go wrong because some people take their job so seriously that they're willing to cause conflict with their boss in order to do their job as they see the job defined.
Mm-hmm. And that was what the Navy taught me, and that's what they instilled in me. And
do your job even if your boss doesn't like it.
Well, no, it's that, we have a higher calling in a sense, and that the people that you're out there serving with are why you're there. And so for me, when I saw the New York Times article and I reached out to my friends and realized it was still happening, it was, man, we're setting ourselves up for failure, and this was just another opportunity.
I think this is a thing most people don't understand about the military, which is maybe why I'm pushing you to say it, which is many people have a sense in the military that if there's any place in the world where you do what your boss says, it's in the military, right? Command, respect for command, just do what you're told is seen to be a central part of the military,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, and maybe that's true for many militaries in the world, but there are some militaries, maybe ours, where there's a big part of the people who say, no, my job isn't just to do what my boss says. My job is to do this particular thing I was taught to do.
Mm-hmm.
And if my boss is giving me resistance on that, I'm going to give some resistance back because my job isn't defined by what my boss tells me to do. My job is defined by this other thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an amazing fact about the military, because you might think in any job it's a bit of a problem to resist your boss because he's just got a lot more levers than you. And so is it really true that in the U.S. military at least, or what militaries in the world, is it true such that they have this concept of their job, which is, hey, I was taught how to do this thing. This is the thing I'm supposed to be trying to do, and this is the thing I'm going to do even if my boss pushes back.
I think for fighter pilots, we have a higher calling to some degree where our safety of our mission and of the assets and of each other are the highest consideration we have. And as a lieutenant in the Navy, if my commanding officer in 05 or in 06 is demonstrating unsafe practices in that fighter jet, I have an obligation to remedy that situation, even if he's my commanding officer. And we're taught as aviators that the responsibility and the decision-making authority of the pilot in that jet is, at the end of the day, absolute. And we have the authority to go against our regulations, our rules, to ensure the safety of that aircraft. In a sense, this was the same principle.
So I'm wondering if that's an unusual feature of pilots because they're so high status. Like, is this really true of an ordinary group of soldiers on a front line, that they have that same sense of, we do what is good for our troop, even if, it's, and the boss says otherwise? I mean, because like pilots are so respected that, successful pilots go on to become admirals, right? And successful pilots go on to become senators, and pilots are at the top of our military respect in terms of outside sense of like, those are the top people. Anyway,
That's why we have that agency to perhaps push a little bit
right.
more.
So maybe that you're an exception.
Oh, I
right?
would think
to
so.
other parts of the military where it's more do what your boss says.
I agree. Yes, I'm certainly stating that cohort is the exception in that area. Yeah, whether I was rebelling perhaps against that authority or not, I felt an obligation to do what I thought was right.
But this is also a reason why we should pay more attention to pilot testimony than anybody else's testimony in some sense, because you do have this norm of this is our job and we're going to do it. And so we can more trust you if you tell us this is in the way of your job, then there's really a thing there.
I'm not going to suggest why people should or shouldn't trust pilots. I think that.
But I will.
Yeah. Okay. You can. I feel counterproductive myself, but
because I'm not a pilot. I don't know any pilot. I have no stake in pilot world. Right? Yeah. I have no connection to pilots whatsoever than talking to you today. This is my only connection to pilots as far as I know.
Well, I don't want to say that. I've been looking to harness that reputation to expand the conversation through this podcast and others to provide a platform for pilots that haven't felt comfortable about this to get on in the seat on the stage and be a voice for this, just like in the past with the ball lightning. Oh, we didn't want to talk about that. They didn't want to talk about that because of how it was received, right?
Right.
And so I want to provide them a platform where they can communicate clearly and openly about their experiences so we can move the conversation forward in a way we haven't before.
And I think, a key status contest is going on here between the status of a pilot, which is pretty high in the military, one of the highest, and the status of, say, academic physicists who say, yeah, but balloons and birds, because here's the vector calculation I give you, right?
Yeah.
Because they're also pretty high status in our world. And that's sort of a status fight that's happening here, right? And so, the essence of that is they have to argue that you guys would mistake a balloon or a bird for the stuff you're seeing, that's a plausible theory of you.
Consistently.
Right, consistently over years, right? Because that's the only other option is to say this thing they've been dissing for decades, they staked their whole reputation of their discipline on is wrong. They made a wrong bet. They said that's so stupid that we can just ridicule it and sort of have fun with that. And they decided to ridicule a thing that turned out to be real. That's going to hurt them, right? That's going to hurt their status in the world. Like all these physicists who are so arrogant about this, if the world comes to believe that this was real, they're going to be knocked down a peg, right?
But they'll also be exposed to an incredible opportunity. I would think. Maybe not them personally, but the career itself.
Well, there's all this physics to learn, but in a party who's not going to try not to show you.
Well, physics aside, but
yeah.
They're just, if we have identified an unexplored area, it's, I think, a golden opportunity for us to redevelop our ideas and our considerations around what we can learn and what might be relatively low-hanging fruit if we actually apply ourselves at scale.
So I used to be in physics and computer science, and then I've been in social science, political science, and economics. And a basic issue in academia is, why is there so much less agreement about social science and the human sciences than there are about the physical sciences? And in my mind, basically, even though we've known less about the physical world than the social world for a long time, we've made more progress in the physical world, and we come to stronger conclusions that we can make more devices in the physical world than in the social world. So something's different there. And my best explanation is, well, we care about the social world. We have opinions about the social world, so we are more, that's more of an obstacle to just figuring out what's true if there's a bunch of things we want to believe. Nobody really cares about the physical world, honestly, emotionally. So they're willing to believe all sorts of strange things because, hey, if that's where the evidence goes, that's where it goes, right? But this is the physical world getting more into the social world. Once physicists speak up about things that people have opinions about, say global warming or nuclear, a weapons risk or things like that, they've had a lot less success at using their authority to get people to believe what they say, because now they're in this world where people care about the opinions. And that would be true here for UAPs, right? They would now they can't just, use their usual way of the world is just random with respect to their experiments. Now this world is not random. This world is, being adversarial, trying to make it hard for, right? Basically, if these people say they saw us sending various, probes at them, like a neutrino wave or something.
We were sending
probes? Say we were trying to probe the UAP to detect them, right? Well, they would probably see these things and they would think, okay, how do we change our things to fool them if we want to, right? This would be an adversarial relationship. We would be trying to figure out what the stuff is made out of, and they would be trying to hide that. And who wins?
It's very similar in a sense to dogfighting. In a dogfight, you want to try to force your opponent to make decisions.
Sloppily, quickly.
And ideally, there's going to be a reaction period. So even if you're defensive, if the person's behind you, you can still move your jet. You're still going to be able to make the first move. So if you make the first move,
if you see them first.
Yeah, I'm talking. Yeah, so I'm getting. You're right. I'm
they
talking.
See you first. They make the first move.
So let's
say
you're right here, right? You're the guy in the back.
Yeah.
I go like this. This guy has to react. There's a reaction time. In a sense, it almost sounds like there's a technology reaction time here. Because if we could quantify that time period, that tells us something, right? It's just I'm identifying places where there's potential for additional data generation, and that potentially is one.
So when the Catholic Church was king of the world, right, it had important theological claims, and there wasn't that much support for people trying to challenge the church or question its claims, right? So if the world comes to accept UAPs as really existing and really being at the top of a social hierarchy and really being the sort of people, the things we should emulate and follow, I think there might not be that much support for attempts to challenge them or probe their claims or whatever. So that's
the group that's.
So the question is like, how acceptable is it to like test the gods, to probe the gods, to look for their weaknesses? Is that a popular thing?
Probably not amongst the gods.
But among the supporters of the gods, the people who worship the gods.
Okay, so you're seeing there could be that interpersonal conflict based off supporters.
Well, like this is like if our world now sees humans as top and we're in charge and we should question everything. But if we go back to more of an ancient world situation where there's the gods above us and they rule over us and we are below them and we are trying to align ourselves with them to support them, how much support will there be for efforts that could be seen as somewhat hostile or questioning? There might be a limited period of in this early years where that becomes possible before it doesn't. That shows you the size of the change you might be looking at here.
Yeah.
Right.
It's intimidating to think about the societal changes that could happen because it's almost as scary as a realization in itself. And I would say even probably more challenging to have an open conversation, especially around people that don't want to engage in this topic.
I mean, it also makes, so say there really was a secret military organization behind the scenes that had all this evidence and they asked themselves, should we tell the world or should we keep this a secret? I could almost see them bringing up this argument. Well, you know what? When people don't believe in this, they're more ambitious and they go farther and they challenge things. But once everybody believes that these alien gods are really around, they're gonna back off on that. Like, one thing we know about the aliens is they're much more stable than us, right? They are not eagerly growing and changing over long periods of time, right? They've been around for 100 million years, and they are restrained with respect to their impact on nature, right? That's another thing we know about them. They did not go wild colonizing the universe. They're kind of eco-freaks, really. And that would raise the status in our world of also more restrained impact on neighbor, less importance of growth and change, and even less of a sense of we're importance and we're at the top of things, more of an acceptance of an order of the universe. These would all be predictable consequences, right, of coming to accept this. And you can almost imagine those people going, not yet. Let's hold off on that.
Can't imagine that, yeah.
And I can see the argument now. I can even think, well, should I be talking about this now? Maybe I'm making a mistake. This is actually a thing I've thought about many of the topics. I just eagerly, I find something neglected and I go, ooh, all right, important thing neglected. I'm going to jump in and figure this out. And then you have to answer the question. Now you're responsible for telling the world about this thing. And sure, it's good to have an overall presumption that more knowledge is good, but it's not always going to be true. Some areas more knowledge might be bad and might be one of your areas, especially since other people chose not to do this. Maybe you're defying their judgment here. Maybe it's not so good if we all know about this. I got to admit, that could be true.
I think whether that's true or not, or at least I feel like whether that's true or not, objectively, subjectively, as humans, we're going to want to know regardless.
Except there's all sorts of stuff we don't look at. That's the subject of my second book in the elevator. There's a whole bunch of stuff humanity has known for a long time that we refuse to look at, that we consistently look away from.
That's fair.
And that says maybe there's a lot of things we don't want to know.
Thinking maybe more about myself than humanity in general. I mean, I would need to know. But you're right. I mean, there are a lot of things that we just simply close our eyes to. I mean, violence, there's plenty of horror in the world. Just to make an obvious example. I know your book has many others. But yeah, that's definitely on the table.
So, I mean, I have to admit, some of us are just sort of knee-jerkers. We got to know, right? And the world maybe doesn't always win when we people who got to know figure it out. But hopefully on average it does. But I just can't be very sure in this case. It's so great that we're all going to find out we're the king's brother, not the king. And we got to have limited ambitions here if we don't want to get squashed. Not a pleasant story.
I had something. Every time you say the limit our not the potential, but
ambition.
I always I want to attack that somehow, but the only attack I can think of is one of scale, and a reassessment that perhaps the ambitions that are so far, that are so big that we would be limited from are still they pale in our understanding of what that could be, right? Here's an example, right? So we're talking about expansion into space-time as if that's the only potential way that we could grow as a society.
Right.
What about the thought of expanding intellectually through virtual reality and things of that nature?
Or artificial intelligence, say. So the question they have to have asked is if there's some kinds of progress we could do on our computers down here they can't see very easily, could that threaten to greatly increase our ability to violate their expansion rule? Is there a connection there? Then they'd have to be afraid, right? Say we could have AIs that would figure out how to make a cheap starship that's small and dark. And then we make it and slip it away, and they never see anything because it was all on AI simulations they can never see. Right? Now they got to worry. Once they see us having a bunch of computers doing stuff they can't see, well, maybe then we can do this thing to slip away, and they got to draw the line there, right? But if they're not drawing the line there, they have to be pretty confident. You know what? Do as much stuff as you want on the computers. We don't care. We know that doesn't help you make a starship until you actually start to make a starship. And that would be an interesting thing they know about us, right? That there's only so far AI can take us. Just doing stuff on the computers, we'll have to build real stuff, and they could watch for that.
Wonder if you could use that as a litmus test for the scope of potential technology.
Right, so we'd be trying to develop the kinds of tech that they can't see so that we could jump ahead farther than they see, right? If we're trying to fool them into finding a way to slip away.
How would we do that? Would we do that by, look over here but not over there? Or is there a way to really do that reliably?
I mean, one thing is, with AI, we should have, and what I call brain emulation, which is the subject of my first book, we should eventually be able to make computers that have human-level intelligences in them, that if you sent off a starship with just those computers, then that would have us, basically, and do stuff. So then they have to know that as soon as we have that ability, we can send a much smaller starship that works, right? It doesn't have to have a whole human and all their biological stuff. It can just have a computer on it. So that means they have to be looking for smaller starships as they're watching out for them. But I guess they'd either have to be watching carefully to see when we cross that boundary of being able to make those things, or they'd have to realize that they can already detect even smaller starships, so they're not very worried. But, I mean, honestly, like a starship would initially just be a rock that drifted away, and it can drift away pretty slowly for 10,000 years before it speeds up and slips away, right? So could they really see every kilogram-sized rock in the solar system that could escape the solar system? I mean, that seems like a crazy, enormous monitoring.
Especially if you magnify or multiply that by all the potential civilizations that could be monitoring.
Right, but just the ability to do the UAPs around us here is much less than this ability to watch every rock that could slip away. That would seem to be an enormous capacity they have to fill. So you'd think, maybe they draw the line before that.
It's just one of those capabilities that would, in my mind, lower the probability of it being successful. So if you are taking such a one-off chance, like, hey, we have to stop every possible rock that gets out of here. You know, again, if you multiply that across all the potential civilizations, your probability of success, I think, would be pretty
remember
small.
that the most probable scenario here, there's just us. There's no other civilizations. There's just this one other civilization.
Most probably.
Our panspermian siblings, and then there's just us, and that's it. So we're the only one risking breaking the rules. So they can devote a pretty large resources to us. But the question is, like, why should they wait till we're much bigger where it's more expensive? Why not cut us off earlier if they're going to cut us off? So, I mean, they must be hoping, you see, that we decide to become this civilization-wide, peaceful eco-civilization that doesn't want to expand. And that'll happen soon, and then they don't have to shut us down because we will do what they want without us having to push for it, right? So that seems to me like they must have a belief about when that typically happens in a civilization's evolution, when it happened to them, say, and they're wanting to wait until that either happens or it doesn't. After that point, if it doesn't happen, then they got to step in and do something. But they want to give us the chance to do it first, and actually at the moment, we are at that tipping point. So, I mean, it's important to notice, say a century ago, most nations, the elites of that nation were mainly identifying with that nation, and they were thinking, how can we promote our nation? And today, elites in the world are mainly identifying with the other elites of their type in the world. And that's why there's so much convergent regulation around the world in nuclear energy and medical ethics and all sorts of things, which is why, and it's part of how our civilization is no longer competing fiercely internally. We don't have as much national competition. And we are halfway there to this world where we all decide things together, and we like that, and maybe we don't want to end that by allowing interstellar colonization. So that would be the story. Like a few centuries from now, we'll say this long history of we solved global warming, we solved inequality, we solved overfishing. Look at all these things we did by getting together and talking about it together and having our elites agree and just do it everywhere in the world. And then at that moment, the chance of sending off an interstellar colony will mean that ends forever. And the question is, will we allow that to be sent off? Or will we try to impose a regime forevermore of not allowing that, which is very expensive and hard, but that would be the cost of having this integrated world community. And I think a lot of people really like that. That is, we aren't fighting each other and competing and then evolving into strangeness. We are going to stay human, we're going to stay a community. When we have a big issue, we'll all talk together, we'll decide together, and then we'll do that thing, and that will be humanity. And a lot of people, I think that's just a very attractive vision.
And a bit Star Trek for Star Wars, if you will.
Yes, right. Star Trek is more the world community agreed together and enforced its agreements.
Where do you think we're heading?
Well, you can just see a lot of emotional energy in that direction. That is, because we're halfway there. Like, think of COVID. In COVID, within a month or two, the usual medical experts' advice was thrown out. Elites around the whole world had a whole new opinion about masks and travel restrictions, and the whole world did it together and basically nobody even did a challenge trial, which would be violating the usual medical ethics rules, and nobody in the world allowed 100 people to just get infected and see what happened. That shows you how much we're already sort of halfway to world government. And people like that. At the moment, Iran is the only country in the world that allows organ sales of any sort, and it's very much government managed, but medical ethics conferences all the time, they're talking about how they're going to make Iran stop being this deviation who's doing it different. Because the whole idea is any one country deviates from the world consensus, and that's just a crisis that needs to be addressed. It's like in COVID, the biggest deviant was maybe Sweden. And they were really dumped on by the rest of the world, and it turns out they did pretty well. And that's not talked about so much because people really hated the idea that anybody would deviate from the consensus on what to do. And that's where we are now. And you can see that sort of an attitude once you reach, say, several centuries of more of that, and we succeed in many ways of solving many problems that way. And then the question is, should we allow a colony to leave, after which point our civilization is fragmented, it fights, and it evolves into strangeness? Do we want to allow that? And you can imagine them saying no. But the consequence of that is you don't expand. And then you never become the big grabby civilization that goes off to, fill 1 million galaxies with whatever you want. But you stay a unified civilization. And that's plausibly what, say, the UFO aliens chose. That would be the theory why they're here now, but the universe around us is empty.
That's fascinating. Well, thank you for fighting the consensus with me on this.
Well, I feel like I may have opinions, but the most important thing about this is just to get the basic conversation going and getting people to see the choices. You know, I don't think my opinion should influence where civilization goes, but I want us to see our choices.
Exactly. We can't be blind to this, and that's what we've been. So, by having this podcast, bringing folks on like yourself that are willing to go out there and have those conversations and think about it logically, I think for me, that's one of the avenues I've chosen to help move this conversation forward. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
2016 was like a portal year. I always look back on it as a landmark of when things really got shitty. On the 13th of the 2nd, 2021, an Antarctica thread regarding a newly cropped up picture of what appeared to be a spider-like creature in Antarctica cropped up on X that were found in a Google Earth thread. An anon came forward claiming that his father was a doctor that worked at McMurdo Station in the New Zealand claimed Ross dependency area of Antarctica, and that he knew about these creatures beforehand. The following are his posts before he went quiet. Boy, I sure do fucking love mutated penguin spiders. It's not my fault they have to live here. We're kinda in the same boat. I have no memory of choosing any of this. I guess they built them a big fancy new house here, but it already fell apart and leaked water everywhere. I had nothing to do with the polar bear murder last week. I thought that was wrong. You can buy land on the moon, but not on Antarctica. I find that interesting. What would be the approximate size of it? Here is a zoomed in picture of the creature. OP, I am the foremost expert on this subject. My father was stationed in Antarctica at McMurdo Station. He's told me things. Y'all want to hear some fucked up shit? I'm using a name because it's easier for me to keep track of this shit. Some background. My dad is a doctor. Was stationed at McMurdo for 11 months in the 90s. Not saying what year, because he was the only doctor there, and y'all could track me down. Frequently went out on scientific expeditions. First and foremost, there were some areas people just didn't go to. They weren't environmentally hazardous. They were just avoided for one reason or another. When my dad asked one of the researchers who had been there for 10 years, he went pale and told him to shut up. It was about 30 miles south, 10 east of McMurdo. They took a 5-mile detour around whatever the hell was there. So already things are adding up. There were little outposts here and there, thinking a metal tube sticking out of the ground with a hatch in the side. They were supposedly emergency inclement weather shelters, but the walls were too thin, and they were always locked. Secondly was a weird structure. My dad said one time they were cresting a hill near the spot they avoided, and a gray building with a white roof was in the distance, and that it didn't look like the normal shelters that they used, but almost like an office building. Also, sorry about spelling and shit. I think faster than I can type, and I want to get this out there. Thirdly, there were the striders. Big, fucking, 5-legged things that crawled across the continent at night or in snowstorms. There were sightings from the military personnel there. Most of McMurdo is US Navy. My dad had a Polaroid of one of the footsteps in a track from one of the Dakars they had, and it was easily a foot deep into the snow that was already packed down from a 10-ton truck. Also, what the normal shelters look like. You make a good point. The official reasoning for Antarctica being controlled is they want to keep it the last untouched place on Earth. Like Strider from Half-Life big, as far as they know. Footsteps at least 30 to 40 feet apart, and now, if you have ever played Pathways into the Darkness, one of the enemies resembles it, but only just. Think pick related, but white/gray. 7 to 8 stories tall, and 5 legs instead of 2. Like Morrowind Striders? Oh no, never seen them. KK, my guy. So as I said, my dad was a doctor. Got yelled at by his superior officer, who said they Didn't need none of you unwanted smart types around here. Guy was a prick and hated anyone who wasn't a grunt or a researcher. Let leak to my dad he was a replacement for a doc who had snooped around. Tried to scare my dad and shit. Guy was a total douche. One day, a guy who my dad knows for a fact isn't at McMurdo or any of the nearby bases comes in, escorted with severe lacerations. He is told that the guy fell. My dad calls bullshit. The cuts were too clean to be ice or rocks, plus no debris was left in the wound. The guy was delirious, and while he's under anesthesia, starts talking about things he probably shouldn't be saying. Something about, we let them loose, and they were frozen, we thought they were dead. He starts to say something else, but the guards yell at him to shut the fuck up and gag him. That's right, they gagged a guy who is only getting oxygen from a mask. My dad flips and rips it off, yelling at them and asking what the fuck they're doing. The guard sticks his M16 in my dad's face, forces him back to his quarters, and doesn't let him out till the dude is patched up and waiting on the next plane from South America. In regards to Morrowind Striders, too small, too fat, but the legs are right. Think upright torso on 5 spindly legs, open top, much taller. Oh yeah, but after that, he started taking some stuff. He had an Apple IIe he used for flight sims, and he started to keep track of information he had gathered. Said he hasn't looked at it in years. I'm going to try and get it out and running and see what I can find on it. Till then, not much else I know about what went on. He said he saw the Striders a few times in the winter, but kind of hard to prove. Says he's forgotten about a lot these days. If I can find the computer, I can get more stories. Other than that, not much else. One time they hit something with a car, which was a big deal since there aren't many penguins in the Arctic, and when they got out, the researcher who told my dad to shut up forced him back into the car. Dad said it looked like one of the things from the Cloverfield movie, but you know, all fucking crushed to bits. So spindly, little legs, and the like. Says he thinks it was buried under the surface level of snow, which is why they didn't see it. Also, agreed, it sounds stupid, but what? A fast-growing, possibly supernatural apex cryptid with a wet, spindly body that only moves in low visibility? I'm only parroting what I heard. I would say it is maybe 20 to 30 feet tall, but I wasn't there. My dad's theory is that while taking bore ice samples, we found something, dug it up, and one or more escaped. They grew into what roams Antarctica, and we shut down the continent because of it. Anon claims that his dad had a wooden plaque from the station, and says he will post a picture. Give me a few, guys. I'm going to take a picture and censor the name of the plaque my dad got from being stationed at McMurdo. We'll have the whole X in the date thing to prove I ain't lying. Here is the pictures that OP took as promised. Found it and got it out. Can't find the keyboard though. And here is proof he was at McMurdo. Here is a picture of the pins. I can't get it running tonight. I'm honestly really tired. I have work tomorrow morning, but my dad literally just woke up, and I asked him, and he told me something he didn't already tell me. So people die in Antarctica. It happens. It's cold and accidents happen. Every time, someone died during the winter snowstorms though. He had to wait for them to fall and sew them back together. Similar wounds from the person who dipped in the summer. Except one man, another he didn't know, who was missing his lower half. This guy was carted in by similar guards, but not the same. His intestines had spilled out, and my dad had to sew on fake clove lower half after sealing up the guy's lower torso. They then dressed him in battle dress. The official cause of death is hypothermia, but we both know that's bullshit. His lower abdomen from the end of the ribcage down had been ripped off violently. There's shit out there in arms. You better fucking believe it. So I asked him a few more questions about injuries, and he said a lot of lost limbs from frostbite. A few cuts here or there. Those two are the only two that stick out to him. There were a lot of lacerations on people who did stuff outside in the winter, and the only ones allowed out were a certain group of Arctic warfare soldiers and the researchers. He said talking about all of this has gotten his memory going. Said he grabbed one of the researchers' journals one time, and it had all kinds of diagrams of shit that didn't look anything like any animal that was supposed to be out there. This is where he got his descriptions for the striders and the spiders. He cornered one of the researchers once and questioned her. She got really stiff and refused to tell him anything, and he later got a talking to from his co about how useless he was and shit, and how if there was another incident, they were sending him back stateside. He ignored this though, and when his co was away, looked through his files. This guy controlled the whole base at the time, found documents regarding certain operations during the winter months, and that there were requisitions for ammo. He got caught though, and this is what led to him being kicked back to the States. He got court-martialed, but because he never signed an NDA and he never found anything bad, they docked his pay and sent him on his way. What's the source/context behind him? I'm totally new to this one. It's from Google Earth. Some dude that was there took the pics around the place he was. I guess he was a scientist. Here is the pic previously mentioned. Let me get him to look at it. He says he doesn't know. It's on the opposite side of the continent from him, near some Australian and British stations. Other people's stories. Once they told my dad he was being shipped out, despite the fact that it was the day he was supposed to leave. He stopped caring what people thought, and started gathering stories from everyone he could. Most of it was I saw this or I saw that, but nothing he could really work with. Then came in Jones, not his real name. Jones was one of the Arctic warfare specialists. Green Beret. The guy was autistic, strong as fuck, and smart as hell. Only got through all the training because he could hide himself, and while being regarded, could do a lot that other members of his team couldn't do. But the one thing Jones had that the others didn't was a conscience. Jones felt bad for what he did, and my dad had an undergrad degree in psychology. They had an agreement. Jones hurts himself to get sent to my dad. My dad helps Jones get stuff off his chest. Everyone is happy. His buddies didn't know he is going to a shrink. He gets to feel good, and the co gets to have a functioning soldier. One time, Jones wakes my dad up, about 3 days before my dad is supposed to ship out. It's 2 in the morning. Jones just came back from some mission. Says he needs to talk to my dad. My dad tells him to fuck off, not this early, and Jones puts something on my dad's chest. It's the leg of one of these small things. My dad freaks out, and Jones puts a hand over his mouth and tells my dad a story. This is where it all comes together, Anons. Clench your ass. No bathroom breaks until the ride is stopped. Some of you may say this sounds like a story with supporting information leading to a climax. Fuck you. Got to make it sound good for YouTube, eh? Jones proceeds to tell my father the most fucking incredible story I have ever heard, and it confirms many theories on 4chan and IRL, and it proves American collusion with China's human trafficking, and it confirms the reason for tunnel warfare training us Marines recently undertook. Y'all ready? Jones gets woken up at 5 in the morning the previous day by his squad leader. Let's call him Jack. Jack tells him to get his ass up. To clarify, these are SFODA with a total of 12 men in the squad, and that they're going somewhere. Jones expects an expedition with some researchers, but they don't. They go to the military Dakar, with a hole up top for a gun turret. They have an M134 minigun inside the truck, but it's technically demilitarized, but not really. and load up their gear. They leave and make a beeline for the area everyone avoids. My dad figured this out when he said he was heading southeast, and they get to this office building, and it looks sorta like pick related, according to Father's recollection, and they drove up to it. They park out front, operator their way inside, and it's fucking carnage. Think government lab in season 2 of Stranger Things. It's just fucking nuts. They clear a few rooms when one of their guys gets murked by one of these tiny fuckers. They light it up and keep going. There are offices with names on them. Some American, some Chinese, some Chilean. There are bodies everywhere. It's crazy, right? So 2 more guys get injured, and they're moved outside to the truck. The rest of them move downstairs to the tunnels. It's a secret lab, and it is gigantic. They have a strider in a cage that's fucking big, or at least they used to. Many of the cages are broken open, and there are dead bodies everywhere. Jones doesn't say much about this stuff, other than there are tunnels with bullet trains in them, with destinations like Hong Kong, New York, Melbourne, a city for every major country out there. They find a cage that has been ripped into, with 2 spiders in it. They are eating children. In Antarctica, there are children? Shouldn't be fucking possible. Oh wait, China. It's been known for a while that China plays a huge part in its huge amount of human trafficking. Now we know where the bodies go. They found a few scientists and moved them to a different base. Exterminate most of the fuckers in there and move out. It took them almost 18 hours of pure fighting to clear that place out. So guys, I guess we really know what's going on, and I'm very, very, very grateful to get all of this out there. Honestly, my dad would kill me if he knew I have shared this. But honestly, I'm sick and fucking tired. I remember a time where I didn't know, where I grasped at straws for an answer to questions I could barely understand. Here it is, X. Here are your answers. Okay, so what are the Striders? Extraterrestrial? Interdimensional? Subterranean? Hyper-evolved apex predator? I will answer questions for a few minutes. Ask away while you can. Subterranean. They start off small, but grow real fucking fast. I'm assuming you're same guy, high on weed guy. I haven't read M411, but I think I should. I feel like it should be entirely possible for the government to take what they found in Antarctica and bring it to America for study in less inclement weather. I think they are frozen since the Ice Age, and were apex predators at the time, like dog intelligence. No, less supernatural, more cryptid. Yeah, bullets work well against something that evolved long before humans. Not much armor, think like a bug. Hard outer shell, but easy to penetrate with a 5.56 FMJ. Not just there, and for more than food. Probably also experiments. Built by us, think just standard office building, reinforced for the winters. Well y'all, I finna pass out. It's good to know I made my mark on 4chan history. I'm back guys, and I got news. As I said, this Anon always delivers yesterday. I said 9 o'clock p.m. EST, and on my clock, it's 9 o'clock p.m. EST. I can't find the latest thread it was. It was sometime around midnight last night that I joined it. Found the old thread. Dim, stupid, read to get up to date. So the hard drive died a while ago, and my dad replaced it with a micro SD. Had to lie to get him to open the case, so no paper with name. But compare the desk, and it's the same. Apple IIsi hard drives didn't last long enough to be able to get the information off them. They are a 30-year-old computer. Apparently, my dad replaced the hard drive with a SCSI to micro SD card, and the drive is long gone. Convenient? Yes. Disappointing? Also yes. But I'd rather come back and tell you than ghost and be regarded as a shill. It's entirely possible he held onto it. He holds onto everything. So I would have to go through boxes and boxes of old electronics to to find the 40 megabyte hard drive that came with it. I'll go look and send a pic of what I would have to work with. It's possible, but I think it's just for research. Also on the LARPing thing. Yeah, I know I slipped up when I said NDA. It wasn't exactly that, and it was more technical. But long story short, they couldn't legally get rid of him without a fuss being raised. They definitely have. I know of an Oklahoma story of something similar to what my dad saw in Antarctica, and small, spider-like creatures are in all kinds of these stories. Like I said, he doesn't get rid of anything. This is a third of the stuff in that storage room, and we have twice as much as this in the garage. Photo of the backoffs. Copyright 1988 on the chip for both of them. I'ma take the one with the Apple sticker on it apart and see if I can find why it broke. If that screwdriver is the type with magnet tips, get it the fuck away from the drives. Why are you taking apart the drives? Holy shit, stop. What the fuck are you doing? Your concerns are warranted, but as I said before, this is a 30-year-old hard drive for an unsupported OS that I know for almost a fact is broken. I think your intelligence side is right for thinking that, but it ain't no hoax. I'm not promising shit. All I know is what I've been told. My dad archived his own stories and the stories of the people he worked with while he was at McMurdo. They are supposedly on this hard drive. This hard drive has been broken for at least 5 years. I'm not sure what else I can say. You're right, but fuck it. I ain't doing much with this life anyways. You should ask G what to do. Good idea. Done. A thread is made on G, but is almost immediately removed by moderators. The wiring on both sides looks alright. It's probably the disk inside. Honestly, I'm not sure what to do. I ain't good with this kind of stuff. Most of the drives of this type died a long time ago, including this one, and I've shared all the stories. Have any suggestions, my guys? Yeah, guys, I can't get the info out of the drive without professional help. I'll go to a data recovery guy and get it out for you. I'm in too deep for this now. Proof that it's locked. I will be back as soon as I can. I need to wait for a paycheck before I can recover it, and that's next Tuesday at the very least. Goodbye for now, Anons. If you don't hear from me again, it's because I am gone. If there is one thing this Anon does, it's deliver. After this, Anon sadly did not return, so it's up to you to make up your own mind on whether he was telling the truth or LARPing, bullshit or not. It's up to you guys to decide. What are the chances history is fake? Someone stated a theory that we were advanced back in the 1800 to 1900 period with huge structural buildings and statues all over major cities like Chicago. But then they just tore them down, and now we have our shitty looking cities of today. Was civilization greater back then and history was lied about to cover it up? Anybody who says it's not possible is either lying or they are purposefully concealing something. I say of course it's possible. I'm not sure if it's likely, but it's definitely within the realm of possibility. And given the absolutely giant scale of the universe, it is extremely likely that at least one or a few civilizations have already hidden their history from the masses, and there will likely be many more occurrences to come. 51%. This is the biggest rabbit hole there is. Nowadays, I find the alchemy and magical history take entertaining at most, and I only trust the physical evidence, like rocks, melted structures, petrified stuffs, and signs of ancient technology usage, because anything pre-World War I to World War II is probably fake or extremely misleading. Even new archaeology digs might be implants to guide history, or am I grasping at straws? 100%. More disturbing than this obvious thing is that our history also seems to be fluid. No one even had thoughts such as yours, OP, before about 10 years ago. How is this possible? Were we just dumb, blind, collectively suffering from amnesia, drunk on the abundance and great times of the 80s and 90s? Our perception had undoubtedly changed and continues to evolve. It truly is like we are all waking up. Well, some of us. The ones that are not seem to be even more ensnared by the reality spell. You know whom I'm talking about. The people you know that can't wait to enter the metaverse. Any metaverse. Right after they get a Neuralink implant. It's speeding up as well. I think a lot is fake, but the question is to what extent? One thing I am fairly convinced of is that the official history regarding the Roman Empire is largely faked and plagiarized from earlier Greek history. Part of this is also that the Catholic Church invented about 1,000 years at least of history that we call the Dark Ages. Weird how there are ancient ruins in Rome, then literally no old buildings at all till you get to the Renaissance. In my opinion, if the Roman Empire fell in the 300s or 400s AD, it's likely the real year would be 1022, not 2022. This article is worth reading at least. Not sure if true, but an idea worth exploring. I think it's also interesting how you never see plans about how they build old buildings. The Liverpool Cathedral is glorious, but it still took decades with modern industrial technology. No idea how people built cathedrals a quarter as big, even without similar technology. Surely masons over time would have preserved their methods, no? It's just crazy to think of how fast a city like San Francisco got built up. Went from being a backwater Spanish mission in the 1840s to one of the biggest cities in USA in like 10 years, with tons of beautiful architecture. I live in a modern big city. It takes multiple years to build a single apartment building with like 100 to 200 apartments. How the fuck did they build large buildings before widespread industrialization? I'm pretty sure most of this is BS. We have tons of archaeological data, and so on, that suggests that the history we know is real. Sure, they, historians, scientists, etc., might all be lying or duped by some giga-conspiracy, but if that's true, then we have zero hope of finding any truth at all. I find it hard to believe that the entire world history is almost entirely fictional. Just look at our modern news networks. They typically all start from a grain of truth, not just completely fabricated from the ground up. So you can live in an isolated world of doubt and conspiracy, or trust and accept most of what is said by the current experts. Obviously, this reasoning has its limits, but this would require such a large, world-changing conspiracy that however